To call this meeting of the New Hanover County Board of Education Policy Committee meeting to order. I will go ahead and call the roll. Ms. Craybill? Ms. Craybill? If you can just give us a thumbs up, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like talking to myself over here.
Okay, Ms. Craybill is here. Mr. Wildebohr?
Present.
Mr. Wildebohr is here. I am here as well. A quorum is present. I will ask at this time for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Craybill, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote? Approval of,
Yes.
and I am a yes. The agenda is approved. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to look at the minutes. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Craybill, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Yay.
And I vote yes. The minutes are approved. All right. The meat and potatoes are policy updates from North Carolina School Board Association. We have a couple that we'll begin with that are outside of the policies that we're considering in the 4,000 series. We need to look at 4,300. But I'd like to begin with looking at our board agenda policy, policy 2330.
Okay.
Let's see, hold on.
Can see it better.
My computer's being a little slow this morning. I'll give everybody a second to get that pulled up.
Hey, while you're doing your thing, Nelson, we just approved the agenda, but at what point should I have brought up that our committee membership?
Oh, we can discuss that 5 minutes before the end of the meeting today.
Okay, great.
I
Thank you.
think, Ms. Stagner, is there a problem with a brief discussion on adding committee members, non-voting committee members?
I don't think there's a problem with discussing it, but I don't believe there can be any action taken
Okay.
because it wasn't, I don't think it was part of the notice.
Yeah, I mentioned it to Nelson, but forgot to put it on the agenda. So that's no problem, as long as we can just at least bring it up.
Policy. All right, there we go. Thank you for bearing with me. So with this policy, here's what I was thinking. I don't know why we have to have a formatted agenda at all. I don't know why policy 2330 couldn't simply read the board meetings will be governed by board agenda that will be established at a certain point before the meeting, and an agenda review with the superintendent and the chair, and then just, talk about how it will have a call to the audience. It will have a board chair's report, a superintendent's report, Head Start liaison report, et cetera, and just get rid of the specific formatting. Can we do that?
Well, now, I see your point, but I was just reviewing bylaws from another group that I am with, and two other groups, and on boards, and they pretty much all write in there what they want their agenda to look like, so that you don't forget to leave, you don't leave things off inadvertently, or people just come to expect this is what we do.
Okay.
I mean,
the problem we're running into is this agenda is, I think it's a big part of our lengthy meetings.
So Nelson, I would say that it is best practice to have a format for your meetings to follow. Again, for the reasons that Stephanie just mentioned, that it helps the public know what to expect and when the order of things will be. I don't know that you have to have it be quite so prescriptive. That it is such a detailed list. You could certainly, I think, I'm going to pull up I just had it a second ago. Some of these things I think could be combined. You have a separate breakout for administrative personnel. You have a separate breakout for, consensus items. I think some of those things could be combined. Recognition of achievement would be, potentially under the opening. I don't know that the agenda format is the cause of the lengthy meetings. I do think that it, and again, just the agenda format is simply the proposal at the beginning of every board meeting. The board approves the agenda, and so any changes can be made at that point. This is just a way to bring it to the board to propose it, and then the board at every meeting has the option to make changes. Part of the length of the meeting is just there's a lot packed into it, and you guys have a lot of ground to cover. So you might want to think about either combining some of these items or having certain items be held during an interim meeting, so that it's not quite so lengthy every time when you have business. Those are just my thoughts.
Okay.
I kind of looked at the whole thing with, not eliminating the agenda, but I think we really need to reorder it because, we've all talked about the fact that, the action items are so far down. That's why we're making decisions at whatever, 11:30 at night or that kind of thing. I would say we could move the call audience and it doesn't have a time limit there, but I don't know if we don't want to put some kind of time limit there. But then right behind that, we could put the consensus, the old business and the new business, the action items, move them up, and then start some of the information reports, superintendent's reports, instead of having all that prior to, kind of the reason we're really there is the old business and new business. And as I say, unless, and Nelson, I don't disagree with your idea, just let's go, we could take a step and move it and just, say these are the items that will be in there at some point. And then, because we do publish it 5 days before, and I'm sure that we still would use that, but I don't know if we need to have that in the board policy that we're going to have a Head Start report every single time, or whatever else. That's an important part,
Right.
But that kind of thing. But at least moving the consensus, the old business and new business way up, right behind the call of the audience, and so then the call of the audience, the folks are heard, and then we make decisions way up there in the front end of the whole thing. And anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to move the consensus up to after call to the audience. And then I think we can have a lot of the MOUs, all that new business, and certainly our policies can be adopted by consensus, I think. Would there be a problem with doing that?
I have a question. I do have a question. Prior to COVID, were your meetings extended and so that your new business and your old business were not being discussed until about 10 or 11 o'clock?
Yes.
Yes.
It's been this way for 2 years.
Well, forever.
Okay. Forever.
And as a community member watching, because I did it for fun, I oftentimes didn't even make it awake to the business because, if you're in your chair, then it's, yeah.
As a board member performing it, I found it hard to stay awake.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I actually know we did have, famously, we had a board member on the old board who consistently fell asleep.
Yes, she did. Or yes, that person did.
Well, and so that itself lends it to what I'm saying is I think if we move all the not important stuff, because I don't want to say anything's not important, but the the meat, the actual act where it says right next to it, action items. Those 3 action items, move them up right behind the call of the audience, and then we can put the reports, all that kind of stuff, later on down.
Yeah, and I do think we need to just all that most information items. I mean, the strategic planning, obviously that should be done at our board meeting, but a lot of those information items really need to be axed because people outside of the educational field, we can move those to interim meeting. People aren't going to be interested in all that data. So
I have another question. With administrative personnel, since we do personnel in closed session,
we can get rid
would
of
it be
that.
possible to move that to consensus?
Yes.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I would think that's fine. That saves Miss Coker a walk up to the stand. Or Dr. Coker, sorry.
All right, so we can do that. We can move the action items up.
And to my understanding, I know we do give Head Start every month. I think, is it quarterly? I think you can do it quarterly. I'd have to go back and look and see what Head Start those things are, but you can also do that quarterly unless that's something that's wanted. Just looking at if you're wanting to shorten your meetings and then looking at committee reports, what committees do you want to think of? Is it bi-monthly?
And I do think that's very, very important because we do want to hear from our constituents. But is there, what is the time limit on that now? Is there a time limit? Is it, is it always 2 minutes? Is it 3 minutes?
Mr. Wildebohr, that was set in policy, in the board's policy that was recently adopted. It's an hour total limitation, and then 3 minutes per person unless there are more than 10 speakers, and then it's 2 minutes per person.
That's perfect.
And I do have a question about call to the audience. Is there anything that can be done about calling the specific individual's name?
Yes, we definitely have to you can't have anonymous.
Really about someone.
No, not the complaint. I'm okay with the complaint. I'm just saying, for instance, I say Jane Doe hit my child or did this. It's been alleged that Jane Doe did this versus an employee did this. That's what I'm referring to. I'm all about yes, they should be able to come and share the information if they have a complaint. It's more so the individual's name versus an employee.
Right.
It's really-
We had that last time.
Yeah, and I would say, I went to all the Pender County ones, and they actually had in their statute they read on the front end that you were not allowed to personally attack a person by name. So I don't know how they do it, and we couldn't do it.
Well, again, I think that you run into some First Amendment issues if you prohibit people from using names, but I think you can read some sort of statement at the beginning that talks about expectations and decorum and giving optional routes to pursue grievances.
And what we did in those counties where they would read, the board chair would read that statement before, and then they would state, for instance, if you had a personnel issue, we would say Dr. Coker. And so after that person would speak, Dr. Coker would take that person out and get the information from them. If it was something about the schools, let's say it would be Dr. Smith. If it was something about student services, it would be Julie. So they would just read who to speak with. So we would give them that immediate attention right after they had spoken and get the information for them and follow up with them. And that would all be in the reading right before it happened. That's just my.
I would be good with that.
Fine with that.
The only one thing, so they would have to, listen to all the ones that are called in ahead of time so they would know, and then and get back to that person. And then the people, are we suggesting that the people at the meeting that we speak to them like right afterwards, like right after they talk when they sit down, or?
Yes,
They would have that opportunity.
they would have that opportunity to be, taken out in the hallway
Okay,
and
gotcha.
give the information that they are. I mean, they would talk to the board about whatever it was. It just wouldn't put the person's name there.
Right. I also too, on the call to the audience, I used to think this was weird, but now I know that it's not. The county commissioners, they have two separate call to the audiences. They have a call to the audience in the beginning with people who are talking about action items that we could possibly take action on at the
That's a
beginning.
great idea.
And then they have at the end, they have a second call to the audience on issues that are not up for actionable items at this particular meeting. So everybody gets to be heard, but it just depends on where you get to be heard. So how does that work with school boards, Deborah and McKenna?
So you're required to have a public comment period at one regular board meeting per month, if you have a regular board meeting that month. And there's no, and the board is allowed to make reasonable regulations on that public comment period, the time, the place, or the manner, those general types of rules. So there would be nothing to prohibit the board from doing that. I don't think that you can completely limit it to only speaking about agenda items, but there's nothing wrong with breaking it up and saying, we'll hear about agenda items first. And then if you want to speak about other topics, you will be heard at a later time in the meeting. I think that would be permissible.
I think that
The thing that was mentioned at the last board meeting was now that board meetings are, the reason they had the call-in option was to allow people to have public comment even when the board was only meeting remotely. And there's nothing that requires you to continue to offer call-in recorded public comment now that the board is meeting in person. So that's something that the board could certainly, and I think that the board chair, Ms. Adams, said that starting in March, there would only be public comment in person because the board was meeting in person.
So is that a decision that she can make, or is that something that the board can make? Because I'm not in agreement with that at this point in time, to cut off the input, because some people still aren't comfortable coming out in public.
Well, I think that, it was just a decision that she made. The board could overrule that if that's something that the majority of the board disagrees with.
Okay.
I had actually, just mentioned during the last agenda meeting, I mentioned to the board chair that the call to the audience recorded portion was only required as part of the remote meeting. That was my interpretation of how you would have how you would meet the requirement of public comment when you're meeting remotely. And now that you're not meeting remotely, that was not necessary. And so we discussed, taking that off. But if the majority of the board wants to allow that to continue, then I think that you can do that.
Okay. We can talk about that with board chair, separately. Thank you.
Okay. So, I want to keep us somewhat on schedule. Anything else on the board agenda policy?
I was
No.
just thinking that on line number 1, where we say the chairperson and the superintendent, should we say the board chairperson, or is that redundant?
I think that's redundant.
The policies refer to the chairperson throughout, and it's always the board chairperson.
Okay. And can the chairperson send a designee like the vice chairperson if she can't come, or he or she can't come?
The
Yes.
policy,
Yeah, that's covered in another policy though.
The vice chair is always the person who would fill in for the chair if she's not available.
Okay. So we don't have to say or designee. Okay.
So just to recap, at this point, we're going to move the consensus items up right behind the call to audience, and we're going to eliminate the administrative personnel section there and discuss maybe in the future the Head Start. Is that correct? Is that what we've decided?
Yes, I think that's
All
right.
right. Thank you, sir.
Okay, wait. So I'll move up consensus. You also want old business and new business moved up under consensus?
I would say so.
Yeah, I
That's
think
right.
we're gonna try to adopt those by consensus to the extent possible.
And then delete administrative personnel and then split up the call to the audience into the two sections that are at different times.
Lovely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we
So
need to
moved.
call out specifically that administrative personnel is going to be included in consensus so that people don't think that we're, being sneaky? Even though we don't really talk about it out loud, all we do is say approve.
No, I don't think so.
I think that, Ms. Crable, anything that's under consensus will be posted on the agenda for
Okay,
that particular meeting. So there's no reason, you may
Okay.
not have personnel every month. You may not have policies every month.
right.
Eventually, you won't have policies
Won't
every month.
that be nice when we don't have policies every month?
Yeah.
But then we lose McKenna.
All right, let's discuss, I know we've held this for a while, and believe it or not, we are coming up on it. Hopefully we can do it this year, but student scholarships 3445. Ms. Stagner, you've been looking at this policy for quite a while.
So
Can you take it through it?
I'll turn this over to Dr. Faust. He has been working with one of my partners, Melissa Michaud, on this particular issue, and I don't know what the status is of that. So Dr. Faust, do you have some
So,
insight?
yes, so Melissa and I were talking, and the state of North Carolina does have a foundation that if we wanted to use their foundation to put the money in so it would draw out, we could do that. I don't know how long it would take right now. We'd have to contact the foundation to see what we need to do to set up that. I know the goal is to get our own foundation, but it's going to take a period of time for us to get a foundation in our school district up and running. But in the meantime, she did share information with me about I've lost my words with where it is, the state of North Carolina and having that foundation, and individuals use that. Different school districts are able to use it for just this. I would hate for us not to be able to fund this year because we are, waiting. So there are two things we can definitely, I can check the actual foundation in North Carolina to see how long it would take. I was speaking with Julie Varnum. I had a quick discussion about other ways that the foundation could be used in getting it quicker. That's where we are. I just, again, I don't want us to not be able to fund or put it on pause because of the students, although I do, I think it would be much cleaner running it through the foundation versus us doing it. So honestly, we are still, we have our hands in it right now. There was an issue that had come up just a couple of weeks ago with it. And so we're still running it through the mill. So that's where we are on it. It's just that I've got to get I have to talk with the foundation and for North Carolina, get the paperwork, bring it back to the board, let the board see it, do a presentation on it for the meantime, because I'm not going to be able to get a foundation up and running between now and the start of the school year.
And I would say that the current policy is still in place. So this is not, it's not as though there isn't a policy in place existing. This is just and I don't know, McKenna, this may be exactly the same one. It's just been renumbered. So I think it might just be wise to continue to keep the existing one until a decision is made about the future course of how this will be operated.
Okay, so we're not going to move this forward. We'll
Okay,
just,
I had, as long as we're talking about it real quick, can I ask the one question is, if we contribute to the foundation, are we guaranteed to always get our money back? So like, suppose there's another school system that runs short of money and then they take some that they didn't put in? Are any of our contributions protected, or all of them
Yeah.
protected?
They can only be used for the purpose for which they're designated.
Okay.
So that you would not be giving up the funding for some other district or some other purpose.
Okay.
The actual name of it is the North Carolina Community Foundation. And it's the only statewide community foundation that operates local affiliates from the east to the west in the state of North Carolina. And the new Hanover Community Foundation is an affiliate of the North Carolina Community Foundation, and it administers, they may provide funds from the county. And so I have all of the information.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then one last comment we're not going to approve it, but just for food for thought, in section number B, the selection criteria, the different, the rigorous selection process, when it talks about, grades, class standing, writing sample, standardized test scores, all those things. I was talking with my niece who recently got a similar scholarship in another state. And one of their requirements was instead of a writing sample or in lieu of, together with a writing sample, they had to present a brief lesson plan that just showed their creativity and their ability to think about that. Is that something that we might consider, or is that too much?
I don't know. Having gone through this a couple of times, I mean, I'm open to whatever anybody wants. Having gone through it a couple of times, I think what we have in place is pretty rigorous. I would, before I did a lesson plan, I might consider doing like just a video presentation, given how prevalent, electronic communication is going to be in the future of education.
No, and I agree with that. I mean, whatever method.
It's something we can talk about as a board. Okay. I mean, if we change it, we got to bring it forward. And I'm trying to. Okay. But yeah, let's when we get ready to discuss this in March and April when we put it out, let's talk about it and see if we want to change it. I can always waive first reading later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I, Mr. Bowyer, can I bring up a couple of points about the current policy that we have, just in case there's a need for discussion on these?
Please.
Okay. In reviewing our policies, this is not something that has been within my division prior, but in reviewing the policy with my team, we just have a couple of questions, and so maybe this can be food for thought in moving forward. For one, we were wondering about the selection criteria. Mm-hmm. And potentially moving class standing off of the selection criteria and consider adding GPA in there, because it's a better measure of the student's work than class standing. Otherwise, it could be inequitable based on school or course offerings, and also inequitable based on financial resources for college courses in high school. So we might be getting candidates who had more options to put resources in or had more options for courses. And the other point that I wanted to bring up is, especially for this year, we've got standardized test scores, but I think we should make sure that that's weighed against, or the weight is against availability and requirement, because many universities are not going to be requiring that in this year, in this next entrance year. And so I don't think that should necessarily be a clear factor, but maybe that's just for right now, but maybe it's not, I'm not sure.
Well, I think we're going to start putting these out relatively quickly. If you want to make that change, then we can consider something for Ms. Crabill's change. I'm in complete agreement on the GPA versus the class standing. Okay. And then I think we could add language to the effect of standardized test scores. I don't know, when available, would that make sense? Or
when available and required?
When available and required. And then Ms. Crable, I don't know, like I said, a brief 10-minute video lesson plan, would that be?
Yeah, I just mean I've talked to kids like when they're interviewing for summer programs too, and it just really shows that they understand, what it's all about, and we get a glimpse on their passion, especially if it's going to be like if we're in a tiebreaker, who might have.
The only thing I worry about there, I do have some equity concerns there. But, I mean, students who can.
Well, they can work with their graduation coaches at their schools, or a teacher that they're going to use as a reference. And if they're having trouble putting this together, then we help them.
Ms. Varnum, Dr. Faust, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it would be appropriate to bring some type of artifact and let the student determine what that is, whether that's a video, whether that's, a laid out lesson plan from a community event or a student sponsored event. I mean, I certainly think that could be appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so
I think
maybe
Dr.
not
Smith
require,
has her hand.
Maybe not mandate the artifact, but just offer in the policy an artifact such as a video, lesson plans, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I think I would leave it a little open-ended so the student could kind of maybe wow us in that.
Okay.
Right. And also too, I'm seeing this like a graduation project where some kids didn't have all the access to stuff that a school principal or somebody, at the school would help them get the resources that they need, to kind of bring their vision, into reality, for us.
Okay. We can bring that forward. I'll probably ask to waive first reading for 3445 because I know the applications go out soon, and I would do the same thing for our board agenda.
And my last question on this, though, just wondering, do you want to require that the student maintain a full-time schedule? Is there any option for part-time if a student has to work through college? I don't have
require full-time.
Right. I don't have an opinion necessarily, other than, would they become ineligible if they were not able to maintain full-time if they had to work?
Well, my only concern is that they graduate in 4 years. So if they have to take courses during the summer, that would be my only concern. I wouldn't mandate a full-time schedule in the fall if they have job opportunities, or the spring if they have job opportunities.
So I think that would require some policy, some wording language, because under C in the first paragraph, it does say that they are full-time.
But in thinking, I think this was the policy was created when the North Carolina Teaching Fellows left. Are we mimicking something similar to that?
Yes.
So, right. So I know it was a 4-year scholarship for those students, and they had to graduate within those 4 years. So would they just have to be, when we say full-time, is that still considered 12 hours?
Yes.
So would we just?
Yeah.
And in most programs, you're not going to graduate in 4 years if you're only taking 12 hours.
Right.
Not unless the student comes in with
hours,
with credits already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And back in the day when I had my 4-year scholarship, I ended up having to go to summer school to finish in 4 years and never went part-time.
Right.
So yeah, and so I'm with you and your team, Julie, that when I was reading that myself and just wondering, what about all these extraneous, things that it seems like it's an anomaly if you get out in 4 years in any college program, even though you don't want it to be, but yeah, but that would definitely call for some wording changes too.
And I had a question. Would there be any interest, and this has come out of the discussion from our equity work group, about language that would speak to either the applicant or the recipients being representative of the demographics of the district?
Yeah, absolutely. where would we put that language in selection criteria?
I do think you have to be careful about not appearing to award or solicit applicants on the basis of race, though. I mean, so that we would want to be careful about that language. I'm not saying that it can't be included, but we might want to think about exactly, and I don't have language on the fly, but just to be careful that we don't run into a charge that it's being discriminatory.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. We could get into some Title IX violations on that, if we discriminate based on gender or whatever.
But saying that we're going to try to align the recipients with the community demographics is the opposite of discriminatory.
Yeah, the discussions that we've had is just to make the process more inclusive. I think in the 6 years that the scholarship has been awarded, last year was the first year that we had any recipients of color, though we've had some very highly qualified candidates, some of which are actually teaching for us now.
Is this something that we could, that the graduation coaches again, or I know we don't have teacher cadet program anymore, but something that, school counselors or the graduation coaches can help steer, more students into applying? Because maybe some kids feel like they, like if they're like class standing, you take that out and some kids might go, oh, wow, now I think I can be competitive. So maybe that's, that you wouldn't put that in there, but maybe that's one way we can get to it. To encourage more people to apply.
Oh, so a couple of questions. I think that would technically be one way to recruit, just making our own individuals inside aware. But I was reading selections based on the high school grades. Do we want to say a GPA, a minimum of 3.0 to something? Because if you say high school grades and
Yeah. Yeah.
I could go with that very easily. Yeah. And then just take out because some kids, again, we get back to some kids won't have taken as many honors classes, but it doesn't mean that they're not smart and capable of being a good teacher because they didn't take, all honors or AP classes. So
what do you need for athletic participation? 2.5, isn't it? Or is it 2.0?
2.0.
2.0. Why don't we just, selection is made on the basis of a minimum GPA of 2.0, writing sample, standardized test scores. There's diamonds out there. I mean, not everybody can kill it in a classroom. So I don't want to miss a 2.0 stud who just isn't quite there yet with the grades, but is going to be there soon. I mean, why don't we just do that and let the students figure it out?
I think that would definitely go to increasing the number of applicants, which would, in essence, in my opinion, lend itself to a much more diverse population. And then again, you've got multiple things that you're considering as a part of the selection process. What we found is that students of color are screened out before they ever really get to the table, or they don't see themselves being successful in the process so that they don't apply. So I think if you make the entryway to the application much broader, then as you somewhat described, I think you're going to find some really talented folks that otherwise, how the process was previously, you would have excluded.
So question, I employ all students to get scholarships, but we're talking about a free ride. I get it. But can you get into college on a 2.0?
No, yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I think at least it has to be a 2.5, and that means 2.5 is a C+.
That's right. That's low. I'm just saying this is a free ride. And if we start introducing it to students early, there are scholarships out there. I'm torn because I am a lover of education. I am an advocate for education. However, when you are giving someone a $28,000 scholarship, how can you get into school on a 2.0? And then what are the chances of staying in school? So what is the repay back for us if the student does not fulfill the 4 years that they're in there? So we've got to think ahead of time. Yes, I agree that we want to be able to make sure that students, that we are looking at our entire community, that we're looking at our entire population. But if the warning signs may be there, and I know those diamonds in the rough, I'm definitely, but how do we know that a 2.0 is going to be, can they get into what's the criteria, I think, for getting into the North Carolina, what is it called? Our North Carolina, the University College here in North Carolina, that will be the thing.
Well,
So I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Dr. Fels, I think you make a great point. So we could definitely set it to that they have to meet the eligibility criteria for entering the UNC system. But we also have here that they could also attend a community college, which with the 2.0, they definitely would be eligible for that.
But how do they, so when they go, and I'm just actually, I saw that, but I thought that was wrong. So how do you get a teaching certificate at the community college?
We have, I'm sorry.
You are definitely the expert, Mr.
Yep.
Collier.
We have students, in fact, we had one of our scholarship recipients went to Cape Fear for the first 2 years in order to save money. And then we actually used that scholarship savings that that student offered us to give some money to a few other applicants that year. But we have students who transfer to Watson all the time.
Okay,
it is a wide open pathway. The partnership between the community college and the university is strong and growing. ECU is also a partner. UNC is a partner. So there are opportunities for students to pursue that path.
I read that.
If I could,
it was written.
If I could interject, I just looked it up real quick. The minimum GPA for the UNC system is 2.5, although, and this is from Google, it is highly unlikely that UNCW would consider a GPA in this range. So, I mean, I agree with Dr. Faust. I mean, I think if we go down that far, they're not going to be able to get into UNCW. It says here that the GPA, the 50% weighted GPA for admitting seniors is 3.8 to 4.43. So, I mean, I think I'd like to set it at a minimum of 3.0. We can get in at 2.5, but you're, according to this anyway, you're not going to get in at 2.5.
Well, I know this is anecdotal. One of our students came to us at a high school. They were here for 2 years. They came from the Ukraine. They really struggled reading and writing. After 2 years here, I just wrote for that student for Georgetown and they were accepted. So, you know, the work that somebody can put in, you know, they're 2.5, come to the community college for a couple of years. And again, it's contingent. I mean, they have to pay the money back. Isn't that correct? If they don't complete the requirements, they have to pay the money back. So,
but you know what? Not every student is going to go to UNC. I mean, there are plenty of other good teaching colleges around that are either smaller or, there's plenty of other places that a kid could go. So, you know, you just using UNC because they're so selective, you know, in that regard. But
well,
So
I
I
mean,
think-
in section D, it actually talks about that they're going to have to maintain a 2.5. So why would we,
right.
you know, think about keeping it below, you know, I mean, so minimum, I think is 2.5.
I would agree.
I could live with that 2.5.
Yes.
Well, and in student support, yeah, I would agree with the 2.5. In student support, we feel like we will be able to attract and gather more applicants and candidates if we focus more on the GPA and 2.5 as a rigorous enough, but not require the class standing, which would be the part we thought was really inequitable.
Okay. Is everybody good with that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
Um,
if they go to the community college and they don't use the whole $7,000, are they allowed to roll that over and get more money when they go to a 4-year university to seal the deal with their bachelor's?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that the money is paid to the institution. And so I think it might depend on whether the institution refunds that. But if they go to a 4-year university, it just stays in that account and they can continue to use it. But if they choose to go to a community college first, I mean, I would think that after all bills are covered and all fees are covered and books bought and everything else, at the end, it could be refunded to them to continue, because they're going to owe that money if they don't teach anyway,
So-
but I'm sure that's a legal question.
I think it is, it's not paid all in one lump sum, so it's paid by the semester. And
Yeah.
so if they didn't, and it wouldn't be paid in advance to the community college. So if they went 2 years to the community college, when they went to a 4-year college after that, it would be paid to that college at that point, if I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, I just thinking, you should never lose your money. That if we said we're going to pay, up to $7,000 per year, $28,000, how I choose to break it up shouldn't be a big deal. I mean, I should be able to save some money to start with and then use the balance to get me to a college that might be more expensive.
Well, it's so 7,000 a year. So if you only use 5,000 in the first year, you don't get to keep that extra 2,000. That is provided again, that if there's additional funding left over, it goes back into the pot. That's what Nelson was talking about. It can be distributed then within that pot of money. So someone may only spend 10,000 the first 2 years, and then they get the full 7,000 a semester if they transfer to a more expensive school. That's in practice, that's my understanding of how this program has worked.
Okay.
All right. Are we
All right.
ready to?
Wait, so what language did you want to put for the artifact? What do you want to call it?
I would just say something to the effect of a student produced artifact. And I would be as broad as possible. I don't know if Dr. Smith, Ms. Farnham, if you have any other idea there.
I think it could be a related artifact. I mean, maybe just put artifact related to planned course of study or planned
Classroom
path of study.
instruction.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Artifact related to,
Maybe planned
I would say
path of study or
students preferred educational pathway. I would like something to link into, okay, well, I want to be a second grade teacher. I want to be a high school science teacher, something like that.
So maybe it could be an artifact related to instruction in a K-12 setting
Yeah.
or a pre-K-12 setting.
Yeah. Because, just because you think you want to be a math teacher, you may come out not being a math teacher.
That was me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Case in point. Right.
Maybe something along the ideas of a portfolio.
They produce a full portfolio as part of their application. So this would just be into it.
Okay.
It's pretty extensive. They do a good job putting them together.
Very good.
Okay, so let's move
Long
on.
story short,
So
this
we
is
have
on hold,
policy
right?
4,300 emailed to all or in our packets, but I don't see it on the list today. There was only one small change. I guess we can just discuss that at the meeting. It was just the restorative justice change. That's all I saw on it.
Well, and I wanted to address Dr. Faustus' concern at the last board meeting where he said, do we have training on that? And so I was just, asking around, in the social worker arena, and some have and some haven't. So I was going to propose that if we wanted to write that in there, that it can say restorative justice practices can be used as appropriate, provided that the proper staff training has been conducted. Would that kind of meet your concern, Dr. Faust?
What I'm accustomed to is that we don't put, we don't name a practice in a policy. It's like, you don't put the brand name, you put all of the artifacts that they would have, but that's not necessarily that brand name, because we may find that there's, next year there may be something that's better than that, and we would use that one instead. So it's more or less pulling out the adjectives or not limited to, when we state that in there. I'm all about the practices, because they do work.
And that technically does fall under positive behavior support strategies or practices, because it is about, recoupment of dignity and conflict resolution, and includes psychological resources as opposed to disciplinary measures. So I do think it's included. It's just about whether you want to name it or not.
So I don't understand. Tell me where that would be included, because I'm thinking when I was looking at this that statement really would be better off under the minor violations, disciplinary measures or responses. Doesn't it fit better there? Because I was looking at individual or small group sessions with the school counselor. Isn't that what restorative justice practices are?
They can happen there, but no, they're not. They don't all fall under the criteria of restorative justice.
Okay.
So
they all don't, but
right. They could fall there. Yes. I think that's one of the options. And, circles, restorative justice circles, or things like that. Those are some of the strategies, but that's sometimes a practitioner might determine that doesn't necessarily apply. So
would it make more sense then to call it out in section, D1 as just another avenue, so that we're not really calling it out as a principle? Because to me, it makes more sense in that area than it does where we put it.
And so it does apply generally there under G, individual and small group sessions with a school counselor. So I hear what Dr. Faust is saying. I'm not opposed to listing it, but I think it's a good point to consider whether we list restorative justice and not other types of pro-social and positive support strategies or programs.
Well, I put that in because of some of the work that I was doing, mainly, at DC Virgo, where they're not one of our school system, not one of our schools anymore, but also because that was, several members of the community had asked for us to talk about it. But I would not have a problem if we moved that language down into 1 to say what you just said, Julie, to using, what did you said, positive behavior support strategies or something like that, to write in there. I mean, would that make more sense?
And so if we look back at A principles on the first page, positive behavioral interventions is listed there. So if it is determined that restorative justice needs to be named, I would suggest adding to G, individual and small group sessions with the school counselor, may include restorative justice, and I would want to, I don't know. I think it would fit there. I don't think it's a separate item.
Okay.
I think it's a more specific version.
All right. And since we jump back on this policy, I'm going to jump back on my bandwagon. So if you guys don't mind, back to N, exclusion from extracurricular activities. I think we need to have a little bit more understanding of that. We're talking about a game. We're talking about a one session of a band. Are we talking about exclusion? Is exclusion? I mean, So basically, Johnny pushed Susie, Susie pushed Johnny back, and they're excluded from, FCA forever. Is that what we're talking about here? If not, I think we need to better define that.
I guess I would say those are areas where I feel like we put it in there because is it theoretically possible that we would want to exclude somebody from extracurricular activities? And for me, the answer is depending on the circumstances. It's possible we could. And so it has to be in our policy. And, I would leave it to, you as the principal in that case to make the right choice. You might not do it based on your situation, but the principal at Parsley or the principal at, Noble or what have you, any other principal might say, okay, well, it's reasonable. So it has to be in there at some point.
But
I wouldn't add anything to it because then it gets too specific and it drills down into, way too much. I don't think we can legislate that through policy. I think that's where procedures come in.
So again, then the word exclusion means forever, or does it mean for a game? I mean, that's my concern with this is, as you just said, we go to Noble and that principal is a real hard guy. So Wade's a good guy. So I'm picking on him, but he says, you know what, if you do anything wrong at all this year, you're off the whatever group or activity we're talking about here. But you go to Trask and she understands that, well, this child's only chance is to stay on the sports team. So we're going to try to work with you. So you sit out for a game or a one session.
But if a principal was unfair, they have avenues, students and parents have avenues to appeal those types of decisions to begin with.
Absolutely. So one of the things I don't know of any that's been that hardcore. Being a secondary principal, I'll say this, that, if a child were suspended, they couldn't be on any premises of any school. And I think that should possibly be written in that when you're suspended that you can't come to anything. It could be, an awards day. If you're suspended, you can't come. An athlete, those are usually things that they put kids on contracts for if their behavior is not where it needs to be. They set those things up with the coach and say, for instance, hey, Charles, you are giving, Mr. Wildeboer a hard time every time in class. I'm going to need for you to do X. If not, you are representative of our school when you're doing this. We can't have you out there playing and you were in there being disrespectful to teachers. You're an ambassador. Those types of conversations that are going on. Sure. Typically, you're bringing in the counselor, you're bringing in the coach, you're bringing in, that teacher that they're having the issue with to put that person on some type of notice contract to let them know versus saying, you know what, you've had 3 times in Mr. Wildeboer's class, you're off the team. I don't know of a principal or anyone who has said that. In the event that did happen, the parent does have ways where they come and they say, technically, I want to grieve this. Like, show me the evidence. How did this happen? Where does this happen? Show me policy so there is a level of security so that no one is just being just arbitrarily, I don't like you, I'm taking you off the team.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if it would be helpful if it said exclusion from extracurricular activities consistent with the severity of the infraction.
I think so. Because then a parent would be able to say, like I say, and unfortunately in all my years, I've seen both ways. I've seen where a child is saved by, and that's why I'm on my soapbox about this. I've seen a lot of situations where the reason the child makes it through, middle school, high school, whatever else, is because the coach is there and the coach is behind him and the coach is working with them. And for it just to be, most administrators, I do agree with Dr. Faust, are great and will work with you in any way. But I have seen a couple that are like, nope, it's like you say, you're representing the school, so you've messed up one time and, you're off this season. And that worries me because a lot of times that child only comes to school because they play the bass in their band, and all of a sudden that's taken away from them and they just say, what's the sense of even coming to school anymore? That kind of thing. So I'd hate to see that. I did have one other question. the next paragraph, it says the parent or guardian is responsible for transportation, blah, 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 blah. What do, you know, I understand that, but why, what happens with your 18-year-old, your 17-year-old that drives to school? So does that mean that they can't drive, or should there be something in there, or do we want to leave it just as the parent is or guardian is responsible? Because if a child drives themselves.
So I think that if a child is driving themselves, that is the parent and guardian's responsibility, because they are probably in charge of payment and insurance and all that of that car.
Okay.
I think this is saying that the school system is not going to provide transportation to carry out consequences.
Cool. Very good. Thank you.
Well, back to your point about extracurriculars, it's not just sports. I mean, we're talking about clubs or
That's why I said band and stuff. Yeah,
or participation in CTE competitions, all that kind of stuff.
absolutely.
Well, that is actually our next policy.
But wait a second, we didn't, I just want to see, what did we decide on the restorative justice? Because we kind of went off that. So what did we decide on that? To include it in the wording that Julie gave us about may include restorative justice, blah, 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 under G. Blah, 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 because it's.
Thank you. That's a direct quote.
Yes.
I'm also concerned about naming something, because I go back to the difference between like policy and procedure. We're doing it, and I worry about naming it, because then there are all sorts of legal implications. Like, I'll go back to the NCSBA. Our legal team have vetted these. And Ms. Stagner?
You could say including but not limited to restorative justice practices. But again, if in 5 years that's sort of fallen out of fashion, you may say why, you would have to go back in and adjust the policy. But I think if you are concerned about limiting it to a particular named practice, you could say including but not limited to, and that would give more flexibility.
And it also might be helpful just to list it as including but not limited to restorative practices.
Yeah.
That way we aren't, because that is a mental health term, but that does align with restorative justice and restorative circles, which is very, very much aligned to mental health first aid that we're doing.
I would prefer that.
I'm good with that.
I agree.
All right.
So that's in.
Does peer mediation include teen court?
It can, yes.
So is that another one that we don't want to call out specifically?
I wouldn't, because we don't have the option to provide that. We provide referrals for that. And that happens through funding through the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council.
Okay, thank you.
We partner and we continue to urge them to use it.
Okay.
McKenna, that was in G under one.
Okay. And then are we getting rid of that statement about restorative justice in A?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. 3620. Pete, we're playing in your ballpark again.
Back over here. And I got
extracurricular activities and student organizations.
a lot of pink on my paper.
I just had a quick question, and then I'll turn it over to you guys and Julie and Al. And on page 3, school clubs and organizations may not use the school name or participate in activities outside the normal realm of the school community unless prior permission has been granted by the principal or the superintendent or designee. I just didn't know if we really needed the superintendent or designee. It doesn't seem like a issue that would rise to that level. But
well, let me give you an example. Is that our summer American Legion and Post baseball teams use the names of their schools in their competitions, and they use our fields to practice and have games. So I think we just definitely, and Mr. O'Brien, jump in on that. But that is one that has always kind of, struck me as against our policy.
okay.
Typically, they will not use the school name, but you're right, Ms. Crable, they would use like maybe Viking baseball or Buccaneer baseball or something like that. But so you can almost tell which school they're affiliated with by the name of the group. But typically they try not to use the school name.
Okay, so I think that we should tell them they can't, because I have seen some uniforms in that baseball world where they are using the name.
Ms. Crable, I agree with you. I think that it should not be the school name attached to,
Yeah, no school name.
a club activity or club sport.
Okay.
Okay, so before I turn it over to our board members, Ms. Farnham, are you Dr. O'Brien today, or are we going to go with Mr. O'Brien?
If
That's all I really am, is just Mr. O'Brien or Al or OB, but yeah, so no doctor there.
Yeah.
Do y'all have anything on these?
So if I might, the reason I think this one was held back was regarding the dual enrollment, the students who were homeschool students participating in athletic and extracurricular activities. I sent around back in December a memo that explained the policy changes around that, and also, just describing that it really needs to be a decision. It's not necessarily a legal decision. There are some primary parameters, but I can't advise on language without knowing what direction, you all want to go. So I'll turn it over to the staff.
Mr. Bryan, we had talked about students who were homeschooled playing. You said there were a few. I would like to see that continued.
Yes, sir. We do have a handful of students that do participate. Honestly, I'm not sure if we have any this school year, but in years past, we have allowed for homeschool students to participate in athletics based on the North Carolina High School Athletic Association allowance for that. And I think Ms. Stagner pointed out that we really needed to have something that allowed for that in our policy as well.
So is that addressed someplace else? Because I didn't read that in this policy at all.
Yeah, no.
I'm thinking that it's not mentioned in policy, and I think that's what Ms. Stagner might be referring to, that we do not have it in our policy
Right.
that allows for that. Is that correct, Ms. Stagner?
Yes, you've got to have a policy that allows for that dual enrollment in order to have that participation. And so that policy doesn't exist, and that's a prerequisite to getting into this language about this policy. I think McKenna sent around some examples that other districts were using. I sent around a memo, but I don't know that anyone has made a proposal about what to do, in what direction to go.
And I've never seen that, because maybe it came out before I was even a board member. But yeah, that I don't know if we need a whole separate policy or if we have to just include it in as another separate letter under this policy. It doesn't matter to me where
I think it would be a separate policy. And Ms. Crable, you're right. I don't see you on my email, so I'm going to forward it to you and Mr. Wildeboer right now.
Great, thank you.
And I guess and I have a lot of questions about this, because this is the first I've heard, and I agree with Ms. Crable. I haven't seen it. But if we were to, how would we? I just think about what the horrible thing that happened up at Topsail High School with a child that it wasn't a homeschool child, but it was a situation. So how would you be able to make sure that their grades are up? And I mean, there's just so many holes, and I just would hate to see a team do very well, or any kind of situation where a competition where children do very well and then it's taken away from them because a homeschool child maybe doesn't do as well at home, and we don't know about it because they're not actually under our umbrella. So I mean, can somebody explain? Al, would you help me with that, to understand how we would make sure that that they are making whatever criteria, meeting whatever criteria that the High School Federation requires?
Sure. The policy in the handbook, Mr. Wildeboer speaks to, they have to be enrolled for at least half of a school day. with the school. So if a student was, say, at Ashley High School, they would have to take at least 2 classes at Ashley High School. And then there's other criteria that they would have to meet as well. So the Athletic Association, sets the standard and the criteria for how the homeschool student would be able to participate.
Okay.
So they would have at least 2 courses on campus, and then the other courses could be through the homeschool, because they have to have at least 3 to participate on a block schedule. So at least one of the courses would be from a homeschool, and of course they would have to have that documentation to work towards that student's eligibility when they check that as well.
And
Well,
how
thank
about
you.
attendance?
That makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
How about attendance?
So the association doesn't really monitor attendance anymore. They leave that up to the local district.
But our policy says that you have to be in attendance or have an excused absence on the day of an athletic event.
It does. You're correct.
So how do we enforce that?
Well, again, because they would be enrolled in at least 2 classes with us, we could certainly monitor their attendance, because they would be attending those 2 classes that day. Now, the other piece of this is that, those classes, one could be on campus, another could be an NCVPS class, so it could be a virtual class. So
Right.
A class could be a course down at Cape Fear Community College through the CCP program. So, those courses typically would be 1 on campus, and then could be 2 on campus, but the other one could be, through a different opportunity.
Okay, how about our students at CTEC or any of our other non-traditional high schools that are allowed to play sports at the school that they were originally assigned to? Where do we discuss that in this policy?
So I don't know that that's in the policy, but you are correct that we do allow students to participate at the early colleges at an assigned school or their district school.
Well, CTEC's not an early college, so that would be different. Or is it considered an early college?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So how then do we go about, Deborah and McKenna, how do we go about writing that into this policy or into a separate policy?
So again, I think that this policy does not talk about, or it can't go into the homeschool dual enrollment.
Okay.
Until we have a base policy that allows that more generally. And I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding your question.
No, I just think that we need clear direction on students who attend non-traditional high schools, early college high schools, and playing what team they're allowed to play on, because this, Al can give, all kinds of background, because he spent like years trying to get this figured out on a kid can't just pick, I want to go play at New Hanover for baseball, but my district is Laney, so I have to play at Laney. So I just think we need to make that clearly spelled out somewhere so that nobody thinks that a student or a school is getting preferential treatment on its athletes.
So if that's not clear, my proposal would be, instead of the committee trying to write that language, that Al proposed language to address that concern and make sure that it aligns with what the High School Athletic Association rules are and what the committee wants and what the school district is actually doing, then bring that language back for the committee to consider. And I'm happy to work with him on that language to make sure that it's appropriate. But that sounds like a mouthful to try to squeeze into a policy now at the committee meeting.
Ms. Steiner, if I may, I think my proposal would be to pass 3620 and come up with an additional policy that covers early college high schools and the homeschooled students and their dual enrolled situation, and just make it separate from this.
Yeah, so if I could, let me ask you a couple questions on this. The 1, 2, 3, third paragraph, is that directly from the High School Federation in order to be academically? Is that, I'm sure it is, but I just wanted to check and make sure that was. Al?
Pete,
Mr. O'Brien.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the screen. Is that one, the third paragraph down with the student may not participate, that one?
No, in order to be academically eligible on page
Under
8.
A? Are you talking
Yeah,
under
under-
A, Pete?
Yeah, yes. It's
Hold
all
on
the
one
whole underlined section.
Okay, I see
I'm
it
sure
now.
it is, but I want to make sure it was.
No, that actually does not match the
Okay.
the association policy. We actually have a higher criteria in our district. So the High School Athletic Association just says that you have to pass 3 out of 4. It doesn't speak to a 2.0. Now, we did waive a portion of this policy earlier this year, just for this year only because of the pandemic. But we typically have a higher standard for academic eligibility than does the Athletic Association.
Okay, thank you. The next paragraph, and I think it's probably the same answer, but 3 and 4 seem to be very similar, if not the same. But I'm thinking 4 is basically the same thing, where a school could have above and beyond rules. Is that correct? Anybody?
Which one are you looking at, Mr. Wildebohr?
Mr. O'Brien, the next paragraph,
Okay.
where 3 says has violated student conduct standards found in 4300, and 4 has violated school rules for conduct. I mean, I would think they would be the same, except that the school rule might actually be higher.
Yes, we actually have additional language on this above what the association offers in their manual.
Okay. And just double checking, the next page, B, the 1, 2, 3, third paragraph, is that also from the Federation? That, because I remember back in the day, we would have students that were, they might run, track and play softball at the same time. So is that
That's
something the
state sport.
Federation's getting rid of?
This is actually speaking to a student that starts participation at one school and then
Oh, okay, I got
comes
you.
to another school. You cannot play, say, for a high school in Pender County, play a game up there, and then come down to a New Hanover County school and play in the same sport. You can play in a different sport later in the year, but you cannot play the same sport for 2 schools in the same academic year.
Gotcha. But so they could still, if a person was talented enough, could play softball and run track.
Absolutely. You can be a dual sport athlete.
All right, perfect. Okay. And then I had, my last question is in section B3, where it says school employees may not promote, lead. Would that be an example like FCA? That
I
second
had
one
a
right
question
there?
about that too, that's FCA came to my mind in that paragraph also.
Well, thank you. Great minds think alike.
This is, I'm sorry, Mr. Wildebohr, this is paragraph 1 under section 3.
2,
Okay.
where
sorry.
it says school improvement, because I think about, a leader of FCA in this situation, but, so I'm a FCA person, I'm a teacher at a school, but I cannot promote, lead, or participate in student initiated meetings. So maybe FCA is not a student initiated meeting then. Is that correct? Or are we telling our FCA folks they can't lead their meetings anymore? That was my concern.
No, I think this is more so pertaining to, for instance, if there's a prayer group, of course, the sponsor cannot lead prayer. They're there just for supervision. If there is a religious group, the adult is there specifically for supervision and not to lead, to give any influence in their beliefs. It's literally, that's how I'm reading this one. They're not to promote, to come out and say, come pray with us, come have Bible study with us. The students form the group, they get someone to oversee, or the principal said, as however they do the sponsorship for that one, but it's not led by the adult.
Okay, so FCA, I guess back to my question, so FCA would not be under that section.
So Future Christians of America, if they're praying in there, the advisors should not be leading prayer. for instance, you could think of it as like a religious activity. You could have someone who's of the, the Christianity versus the Judean belief, and they're then putting their practices and emphasis on or pushing it towards a student. So it's literally just for overseeing.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think, the FCA I was talking about was the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I mean, so that, but okay.
So, Mr. Wildebohr, I think the way I'm in hearing this is that it can still absolutely exist. There can be an FCA club. It's just that I think it has to be more student driven, I think is what Dr. Faust is articulating.
I mean, that's right. What you don't want to have is a situation where school system employees are leading prayers, because you run into Establishment Clause issues under the Constitution. That you are endorsing, they have the right to form Christian or any other religious type of clubs, but those ought not to be led by school employees, because then you have that impression or that appearance of establishment of religion.
Yeah, all of the language in this section comes from federal law, from the Equal Access Act.
Thank you, McKenna. Any other questions on 3620?
I do. So under section A, about, the participation and adding extra people, the JROTC, there's an exception in policy 4120. Does that, is ROTC considered an extracurricular activity? Like if we're because we're allowing homeschoolers to participate in that. So how does that?
Yeah, I mean, Ms. Crable, that's required under federal law that you have to allow homeschoolers to participate in JROTC.
Okay.
And so, again, that's why it's singled out. But I think that if you want to take a more holistic approach, that would be included among or within a policy that addressed homeschool participation more generally. But for right now, that's included in there because, and McKenna can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's included because it's specifically required by federal law.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with it being included. I just want to make sure that we maybe just cross-reference it in this policy, or cross-reference in this policy, and then again in a new policy that we might do, and then include that in the back, just so that people know, and you don't have to, parents don't have to search it out. That we're just kind of being upfront about it. Does that make sense? Hearing none, I'm going to assume that makes sense.
Well, wait, so what do you want to do? Say that again. I'm sorry.
No, I was just asking, can we include a reference to policy 4120 in the participation in extracurricular activities, since it is required by law? I don't have a problem with us doing it. I just don't think that, parents and students should have to, look around through a million policies to see how it's included. If we can just reference it, and then just like we do in many other policies, you put it in a cross-reference section in the back. And again, we would do that in the homeschooling policy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you just wanted a reference to 4120. That's fine.
Okay. So in paragraph number 2, when it talks about the block schedule or 5 subject on a traditional schedule, I'm just wondering, does this paragraph apply to middle school athletes as well as high school athletes?
There's a separate middle school athletic guide that we utilize for that.
Okay. Do we need to call this out? I mean, do we need to have a separate policy for that, or because there are extracurricular activities and things that take place at the middle school level? So should we say that, or because this implies only high school, and I thought that our middle schools had 6 subjects and not 5 subjects.
Yeah, so they would, again, it would be 1 less than the total, Ms. Craybill, but I can look that up in the middle school policy but there is a separate handbook for that. That is delineated and that's put out by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction.
Okay, so is that something that we need to include here, that you can, when you're drafting language about the high schools, that you can put in there somewhere, or am I just being overkill? I just don't want middle schools to be left out and parents know exactly where to go look to find out if their kid is eligible or not.
Has it been a problem?
Well, if you're talking about 5 subjects on a traditional schedule, then yeah, because
No, I mean, I think it's covered at the
okay.
in the other handbook. I think. I don't know, Al, is that something we need to add?
Well, I do feel like it's covered in the other manual.
Can we reference it? Just put that in the reference section in the back where we put high school, association in there. Can we? Oh, wait, never mind. You did. I was just looking. Never mind. Sorry. I just wasted like 30 seconds. All right. So in section B, number 1, about the very last paragraph where it says about gender, is there an appeal process for that, or is that kind of hard and fast?
No, so the High School Athletic Association does have a transgender policy. Is that what you're referring to, Ms.
Yes, sir.
Craig? Yeah, there's a specific policy that is in place by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association for that to occur.
Okay. In section number 2, under clubs and organizations, the last sentence says the file should be updated annually with current information. This is talking about school clubs and organizations. Should we put in there at least annually? Because suppose a club or organization is disapproved in mid-year and yet they're on a list. So does that matter, or is that in the weeds too much?
I think annually makes sense, Ms. Craybill.
Just annually, not at least annually? Okay. The next paragraph about collecting fees, and I have not read the student fees policy. I didn't know if that was one that we'd approved already. What about students who can't afford to pay the fees of clubs? Do we need to talk about that they can ask for help from the school?
That's in the fees policy.
It's already in there? Okay. And then do we need to say in that same paragraph about when the school person is collecting funds, and it says it shall be delivered promptly to the school treasurer, do we not need to say anything in there about receipting?
That's covered in the procedures. It could certainly be in there if you wanted, but we have detailed receipting procedures.
All right, so I'm just asking, is this the level that we need to have in policy to make sure that we don't mess up on that?
I would say that if it references managed through the school's accounting system, the school's accounting system should address that level of detail.
Okay, it just says promptly to the school treasurer. Oh, it does say through the school's account. Okay, all right, that's covered. And then the last thing I have on this one is in number 3, 1, 2, 3, the third and fourth paragraphs, where it says no public funds on behalf of the student initiated curriculum, non-curriculum, except for incidental costs. To me, that means facilities, referring back to the facilities usage, and do these kind of student initiated non-curriculum rated clubs have to fill out one of those forms, or is it enough for the principal just to say you can do it?
I don't know the answer to that without looking at the facility use policy. Typically, facility use policy would have various levels of usage, but maybe Al could speak to whether that's in there or not.
This is kind of like a communications department, rule, but.
Ms. Craybill, are you asking, does the club, the student group, the school student group have to have permission of the principal to hold a meeting? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Or-
because it's definitely saying that you have to give permission, but I'm just wondering why we wrote in there except for the incidental cost. I mean, no public funds except for the incidental cost. So the only incidental cost I can think of is when we allow other organizations to use our school buildings, then then they may be charged, those incidental fees like custodial fees or that kind of stuff.
Graybill, could I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
You're correct. Most of the time, the incidental cost is really the custodial. Someone needs to be in the building, and the building needs to be open and secured afterwards. With our schedules, that really never comes into play with student groups. They're always meeting right after schools, and we typically have custodians into the evening. So it doesn't, community group or student groups, clubs, they just get permission from the school, from the principal. They don't go through community use. Outside organizations would go through community use.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that, so we didn't have any miscommunications between principals and groups. And then in the next paragraph down where it says that those groups have the same access of communication, but school officials may indicate that such communications are not sponsored by the school. Is this something where we have to have the disclaimer at the bottom, like the PTAs or other nonprofits have to put on their flyers that said the views of this club do not necessarily represent the views of New Hanover County Schools?
I would ask McKenna where that language came from, but I think that it is, is similar to, this is a non-curriculum student group, so it's not school sponsored, just to make it clear that the school is not promoting or sponsoring it. But I'm not sure exactly where that language came from.
This all comes from the Equal Access Act, and the point of it was just that these groups are allowed to meet on school campus, and so you're required to let them have access to the channels of communication, but you're allowed to say, but hey, this isn't school sponsored.
No, I get that part. I'm just asking, since the PTAs and every other group that gets to sponsor an event at this school, they have to put that disclaimer on the bottom of everything. So I'm just wondering if just to be clear, if we want to be consistent with our messaging about this kind of stuff.
I guess, do you have some specific language that you would recommend?
It says, and Ann Gibson would be able to pull that up immediately, but I have a document that's like I use for, let's say, the Azalea Festival, and the wording says, oh, it's not on this computer, dang.
I guess my question is just what needs to change in the policy, because that it already says that it may indicate that communications are not sponsored by the school. So I guess I'm wondering what you would like to add to the policy.
Well, sometimes I'm still trying to understand, what is policy and what is regulation, but that disclaimer is required to be put on all communications that go home, that are advertised at the school or go home with children, that specific wording. And we're not allowed to do anything if on campus or with students, if we, meaning those organizations, write that. So I didn't know if that was in a communications policy somewhere that we could reference, or if that's, because people get in trouble for not putting that disclaimer on their stuff.
Okay, I will be glad to evaluate that in terms of the communications policies to see if that needs to be included there. Okay. If there's no issue with this particular policy, I'd be glad to take a look at that.
Well, I'm just saying that if we are going to evaluate, after you evaluate it, then I think that we need to reference it so that people know clearly where to go and get it. So, so yes, and if we don't need it, then we don't reference it. But there's just so many little of these kind of loopholes that I think that people need to be aware of, because a lot of times you get caught and it's not because you're trying to break any rules. It's because you don't know.
Okay. We'll take a look at that and then cross-reference any additions here.
Yeah. Thank you, Ann.
So are we still good to move that forward, 3620?
Nelson, if I might make one comment, Ms. Craybill, Stephanie touched on the High School Athletic Association rules on gender participation. And I just wanted to point out that that only applies to high school athletes. The middle school manual on athletics is completely silent on that topic. And so I actually have a scheduled time to talk with Jarrell Lewis about middle school athletics and how the district would like to address transgender students who want to participate at the middle school level, because there's no policy or rule at this point about that. So just wanted to flag that for the committee. It's something that might come up as a proposal for an addition or a modification at some point.
So does it make sense to hold this till we have that conversation, or we just come back and look at it again?
That's up to the committee. I think there's a lot going on with this one that we've discussed today. I'm not sure. It might make sense to have the committee look at it again.
I would suggest that, because we definitely have to wait for Mr. O'Brien to give us some language up in the requirements for participation.
That's fine. We can just hold that one.
Okay.
All right.
I'm reading that last paragraph there, and I'm not so sure that speaks to the possibility that could be allowed for by the association.
Okay. All right.
Take that back. I just read it again. I think it does. It says otherwise permitted under North Carolina High School Athletic Association rules. So I think that does speak to the current policy in the manual. My apologies.
All right. Let's move on to 4440 staff student relations. I had no problems here. Again, a lot of this is state statute and federal law, but Deborah, Julie, Dr. Faust, I don't know if anybody had anything here, but I was fine with this policy.
I actually had a couple questions, if I could throw them out real quick. C, one, I mean, it says shall's fine, but I'm wondering if must might be a better word there. I mean, especially with, everything that's going on.
Shall means that's a strong, I think in legal terms, shall tells us that we have to do it.
Okay, so must it wouldn't. Okay, that's fine. I also had a question down in that same page, number 3. Is there any, and maybe it says it in 4335, I did not look at that, but is there any teeth to, a principal shall, who has the reason to believe the student has been a victim of any, shall immediately report, and if they don't, is, I guess, my question. Or they're fired, I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Is there a, they shall do it, and if they don't do it, just with what's happened in years past, I'm just a little concerned with leaving that open.
So if you will look, if you're under C, reporting inappropriate conduct, an employee who, if you look at the very bottom of paragraph 1, under the letters, it says an employee who fails to inform the superintendent or designee as provided in this section may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Okay, thank you. And then just one last one on that is 4, and maybe it's because we're reporting to the state superintendent, but what about, I know teachers are not mentioned there. And I know that they probably would not report directly to the state superintendent, but a principal probably wouldn't report directly to the state superintendent. They'd go through the superintendent. So
This is a requirement from state law.
Okay.
It's an additional reporting requirement. So that would track that statutory requirement.
Okay, fair enough. Answered all my
And
questions.
it
Thank
has
you.
to do with, it has to do with, because the state board and the state superintendent look at teacher licensure. And so if there's a report, that they will take a look at the licensure of that school employee.
Okay, thank you very much.
So a couple quick questions in section B, number 3, where we start talking about the specifics or examples of platforms that we can use. We recently just come out with Gaggle as a requirement, and shouldn't we not list that in there like we did Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet? And do we need to list Google Chat in it and all that kind of stuff in there too?
So Gaggle is not a communication tool.
Okay.
So
I was
that
wrong.
wouldn't be listed there, but we definitely would remove WebEx because we're not using WebEx. That's not a district approved. Zoom and Google Meet would be the ones that were listed there.
And so what is Google Chat then?
Google Chat is, see, that was video conferencing in section A. That's talking about video conferencing platforms, and that would be Zoom and Google Meet. And chat is more of a kind of a texting kind of communication tool.
Okay, so we don't need to put either one of those in.
No, I don't think so, because I think we're doing district approved. So if you go back to B number 1,
okay,
one recommendation that I had and that I was asking. So it says in the first sentence, employees use of social media. Employees are prohibited from communicating with current students through non-school controlled social media without parent permission. So to me, when it says without parent permission, means they can do it, but just need parent permission. So I was wondering if we remove without parent permission and just saying you can't do it.
Yeah, I thought we ixnayed all that.
We did, but the policy has to be changed for that.
Okay, so should we take out that clause then?
That was my recommendation, just removing without parent permission, and it just says they can't communicate unless it's through the district approved tool.
So Dr. Faust, what do you mean? I'm with you on that. That's what I thought I understood, that we weren't really giving out on this.
Yes, Dawn is correct.
Okay. So the part I left in, and I'm okay with you guys. You guys need to decide whether you approve it. It says, except to the extent that the employee and student have an appropriate relationship which originated outside the school setting. So are we okay with leaving that there? And that's also mentioned in policy 7335, talking about the relations there. So are we okay with leaving that? So I've got a niece or a nephew. Can I communicate with them?
Yep, I'm fine leaving that part in there.
Okay. So then if you go to number 3,
under B,
3B, I was removing that entire one.
Yep.
And then 3C,
take out which? The whole pair,
the whole thing under B.
whole paragraph under B3.
Yes. No, under 3B.
3B. Okay, sorry.
B3B.
Yes.
And then under C, where it says the communication is necessary in a bona fide emergency, removing the provided that the communication is disclosed to the supervisor and parent or guardian as soon as responsible, and adding, because Julie's group came up with a guide for communicating with students during emergency, and I was adding, and the guide for communicating with students during an emergency is followed. Or
is there a policy to that, or is that just a protocol?
this is a procedure that came out of student support.
Thank
That's
you, Dawn.
fine. Ms. Farnham, can you share that language with McKenna so she can put it in?
Yeah, sorry, my internet just cut out. I missed what that last change was completely.
Can I speak for just a minute? Are we on the right one on the screen?
No, we are not.
That's
We
what I
are
was
on
thinking. We're not-
we are on
we're-
page 2.
Page 2. And
And
it's
scroll
B.
down to section C a little bit, just a little. There you go.
There you go.
Right there. Yeah.
So
And
we're talking about striking out B,
Mhm.
3B3, or
No,
that
just
one.
B.
B3B.
Okay.
And then changing C to saying the communication, because this whole section is about that they're prohibited from engaging in other forms of one-on-one electronic communication with students without written prior approval of the employee supervisor and student's parent. And it says the rules shall not apply, however, if one of these things are in place. And so we're striking out B. C, we're changing it to the communication is necessary, excuse me, in a bona fide emergency, and the guide for communicating with students during an emergency is followed. And then semicolon or the last one.
That makes sense, Julie?
yes, and it might even be and. So provided the protocol is followed, and then the communication is disclosed to the supervisor and parent guardian as soon as possible. But the protocol includes that. So I would go with what Dawn said.
Yeah.
We've done that prior. Thank you, Dawn.
And
Okay.
if I could revisit what I said before, somebody just sent me a clip on it, and back to, excuse me, the word must and shall. We call must and must not words of obligation. Must is the only word that imposes legal obligation to tell them something is mandatory. Nearly every jurisdiction has held that the word shall is confusing because it also mean may, will, or must. Legal reference looks like the federal rules of civil procedure no longer uses the word shall. So
What I'm saying is that in all policies, the word shall is that I'm held accountable for shall, like it will happen. We have
Must
two
wouldn't mean
attorneys.
same.
Now, I would say that, asking McKenna and Deborah over the wordsmithing, but I've always read shall as there are no options in between, like it has to do, you have to do it.
So
Ms.
I
Osborne, the
think,
North Carolina School Board Association uses this language specifically for its policies. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, the policy use shall as a directive that person will do whatever it is that it says they'll do.
I agree with with both Dr. Faust and McKenna that shall means must, but I also agree with Mr. Wildebohr that the trend, I believe, is to use must instead of shall because it is more clear. But I know that the policies throughout that we've been approving use shall and mean it's mandatory.
Okay.
So should we change it or leave it?
You'd have to
I'll
go
let-
back to all of your policies and change the word shall. It means, in my language, the policy, which you're going to be holding me accountable for, shall, I know what it means. It's required. I can't get around shall.
Can you get around must though? I mean, you must do it. To me, that's a lot. That's more directive. You shall do it. Okay, but I mean, to me, that gives you a little more leeway. But must means it must happen. There's no doubt.
Well, maybe we can just somewhere make the disclaimer, in our policy manual that we are using shall. So that's what it means to us. Otherwise, we do have to go back and change every one of our policies because we can't use words.
But that's what we're
The
doing.
word
now.
must is also used in policies.
It is?
Yeah, we don't exclusively use shall.
But anywhere where we're using shall, in my learning is that typically, I mean, they mean the same, but the word shall was a little stronger at one point. Is that what they were using when they say shall, it actually had to happen. And I think must in the English language is a little more, it's easier on the tongue. People understand the word must versus what the power of shall has. I'll say that.
Many other governmental agencies like OSHA, for example, they use shall, that, and you just know that in your training. Doesn't matter to me. I don't know if it's worth debating over. We, maybe just going forward, we use the same word.
Even the Supreme Court ruled when the word shall appears in statutes, it means may. I mean, from the FAA. So I don't know. I mean, I think, especially in a policy this important, I think I vote for must if we're going to take a vote. Must is more for.
I mean, I don't know. I'd keep it. I think it works, but it's up to y'all.
Well, you have my vote. I move that we move it to must.
Stephanie?
I don't care. I'm so used to using shall, but maybe, if that's what we're going to, then we start with this policy right here and just put must, and then we go forward, from all policies going forward that we use the word must. McKenna.
So are you saying that you would like to exclusively use the word must and not use will or shall ever? It's going to sound funny. Also, because it's like every sentence is going to have the word must in it then.
I'm just saying for that one C1, I would like it to be changed from shall to must.
Oh.
3C, which one is number 1?
Reporting by employees. Any employee who has reason to believe that any of the following must immediately report. One word change.
I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
That's fine.
Thank you.
In that same sentence, when it says superintendent or designee, can this designee be a principal? And the only reason I'm asking that designee question is because I think that this may have been what might have caused some of our trouble in the past. So I'm kind of curious as to reporting it to the superintendent, but where does law enforcement come in that kind of stuff?
Oh, in my understanding of this one, superintendent or designee, meaning that could be HR, that could be Dr. Coker's position, that could be Dr. Smith, that could be Julie.
Okay, so somebody in senior.
Yes.
Not a principal.
So a principal, of course, it may not have happened at the principal level. It may not be a principal who's in charge. It could be a supervisor on one of the campuses.
Okay.
And Ms. Stephanie, the report of criminal misconduct, the reason that's reportable to law enforcement, if you go down to 3, the section 3.
Okay.
I don't want to butt in, but I will just, when we're talking about going back to the without parental permission language about communication on social media, I would remind the board that, or the committee, that the board just approved policy 7335 on second reading. And that policy actually, I think, will need to be revised because it talks about employees are prohibited from knowingly communicating with current students through personal social media without parental permission. So if you're changing this one, I think that one would you'd need to go back and look at a revision to that one as well, so they're consistent.
Yeah, thank you, because that's what was one of my next questions, because we already approved that we could do it. Okay, so another question is in C2, reporting by students. Do we not want to talk about our Ethics 360? And if we don't want to call out Ethics 360, but I think we should because of all of our training, do we need to call out that, reporting, you can report to the principal or the counselor or Title IX coordinator, but I thought our policy was that we want you to report in Ethics 360 or somebody's got to log it in. So where do we include that?
I would say that Ethics 360 is an optional reporting system that allows for anonymity. I think we want if a student is aware of inappropriate conduct as it relates to staff and student, we don't want Ethics 360. I mean, they can obviously use that, but we want them to report it directly to our Title IX coordinator, or counselor, administrator, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we don't want them to say, oh, I'll just go anonymously report this.
But Ethics 360 isn't completely anonymous. You can put your name.
Yeah, you can, but I think we want this to go through our school system directly.
I just think that we need to give them the option and state it in our policy that is another option for reporting. Because we're doing a lot of work around letting people know that they have this option. So to me, if you tell them that they shall be immediately reported to one of these people, some people still may not report. So we don't have to call it Ethics 360, but we can call it our reporting.
Will that satisfy our legal requirements?
Your Title IX grievance policy specifically says that a complainant, the complaint may be filed with the Title IX coordinator in person, by mail, or by email. Formal complaints filed by mail must be addressed to the Title IX coordinator. A complainant may also file a formal complaint through the New Hanover County Schools Concern and Resolution Process Center by submitting a report on Ethics 360 and specifically requesting an investigation. So, I mean, that's how you file a formal complaint under Title IX. That is a little bit different than
just
reporting a student, misconduct, but inappropriate conduct. But I do think that you could put in there, a student may also file a complaint or file a report using Ethics 360, because I agree that you have really put a lot of emphasis on that route of communication with students and staff.
So I would like to have whatever verbiage we need to make that right in this section.
You okay with that?
Can I recommend that we include that they report, either in person or through our district website, through our digital means, through our district website, because we also have Say Something.
Right.
And more kids use Say Something than Ethics 360. And so I don't know that, but I also don't want to really name that, because that's something that we receive as kind of a product through DPI from the Sandy Hook Promise, and we aren't responsible for making sure we always have it. So I think we should consider mentioning through online or app portals. And if we want to mention Ethics 360, that's fine.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter to me what the wording says. I just really think we need to have whatever wording you guys think is appropriate.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm adding that. Is Mr. Willimore, you good with that?
I'm good with that. Yep.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so in C2, what do you want added?
Ms. Farnham?
Julie, help us out.
Yeah, I think it could say, should immediately report the situation to the principal, school counselor, or Title IX coordinator, blah, blah, blah. Students may also report through online or app resources, such as, but not limited to, Ethics 360, Say Something, or the online well, the reporting concern goes right to Ethics 360. Yeah, so I think including but not limited to Ethics 360 or the Say Something app. Does that work, McKenna? Ish.
Ethics 360, or what was the other?
The Say Something app.
Say something.
Yeah, it's just called Say Something.
Okay, sorry.
And Say Something. Okay, so students may also report through online resources, including but not limited to Ethics 360 and Say Something. Is that it? Correct?
And it's the Say Something Anonymous Reporting System. So that's the full name of it.
Okay.
Say Something ARS.
And we can always take that out if we ever discontinue using that. I mean, this is one of those kind of policies that we probably need to just always be on top of.
And maybe it helps that it's including but not limited to.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
So I have one other wording thing in section B5, letter C, where it says whether communications could reasonably be viewed as a solicitation of sexual conduct or courting of romantic. Would a word something like perceived or construed or something like that be more descriptive than viewed?
Where are we at?
We're in section B5C. It's on page 3 of 4, where it says could reasonably be viewed. I'm just thinking that the word something like perceived or construed, is just much more descriptive of viewed, because
It's fine.
Perceived to me is probably even a better, because who knows what's actual reality and in people's minds.
It's fine. Mr. Waldemore.
That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Waldemore, you good with that? Okay. Anything else on policy 4040? All right. So our next policy is policy 4110, immunization and health requirements. I had nothing here. Ms. Varnum, would you like to begin?
Yep.
I was putting a check mark on 4040. What? Oh, 4110. All of a sudden I got lost by putting a check mark down. I think this one, I have no suggestions. It looks good to me.
I had nothing there. Mr. Waldemore, Ms. Craybill?
No. We may at some point have to come back and look at this if kids ever have to get the coronavirus vaccine, but that is way out of our purview right now.
We'll be looking at it. That'll be an interesting one. Mr. Waldemore, I couldn't hear. Do you have anything here? You're on mute.
I am. Yes, I am. Sorry, no, I had nothing on that one. Sorry.
Okay. 4110 on for first reading. Our next policy is 4115, behavior standards for transfer students. And I had nothing here.
I had a question here.
Sure.
Just a question. If we look at, let's see, section C, student who resides in the system and any of the following circumstances will be admitted without payment of tuition. And I think makes sense to me. But maybe
Where's
this is not
section
even
C? Pete, are you on the right one?
4120. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. I'm sorry. Jumping ahead. Sorry. I don't think I have 40. All right. My fault. Yep. I'm at 4120. Getting ahead of myself.
4115 looks good to me.
The only thing I wanted to just ask a question about was, where do homeschoolers fit in transfer students? Because I know that you don't have a policy for that, but a homeschool student certainly could meet some of the other criteria. So do we need to include wording on that?
Can you give me a little more? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so it's like we're talking, it says transfer students are students who have been enrolled in or who have attended a private school or a public school in this state or another state. But what about homeschoolers who want to transfer into our system?
So private school includes homeschool.
It does?
Yes. Homeschool is considered a private school.
Okay, did not know that. So that is good to know.
Well, under federal requirements, they are.
Yeah, they have to go to state and all.
Deborah Stagner, do you want to add in?
So there's special reference to homeschoolers under I think it's not private school, but it's non-public schools in North Carolina. So I think that it would be covered in that. They would still have to present the affidavit that they had not been convicted of a felony.
But we don't say non-public. We just say private or public.
Private.
So do we have to say?
I mean, you could say, you could certainly, McKenna, is there any reason that couldn't be changed to non-public?
I don't see any reason, no.
I think, isn't it in the affidavit that they sign when they come to school? When they sign, when they register, that you have to check that there's no felony conviction?
Exactly, that's the affidavit I was referring to.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. I just wanted to say in our policy that, in case people are looking at this, prospective parents, that they see clearly that homeschoolers count, that we haven't left them off. And while you're looking that up, I was just curious at where. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So under state law, it says when a student transfers into the public schools, the board's going to require the affidavit. This subsection does. I think it says this subsection does not apply to the enrollment of a student who has never been enrolled in or attended a private or public school in this or any other state. So that's why it says a private or public school, because it only applies to kids who have been enrolled in a private or public school.
So I would like for us to considering school kids are coming from homeschool, because you can have bad behavior outside of the public school or private school arena.
Isn't a homeschool, isn't that covered under a private school? Or no? I thought a homeschool was technically a private school, so it's covered.
Well, McKenna just read that it doesn't apply.
Well, I don't know whether a homeschool is considered a private school. That requirement applies to kids who have been enrolled in a private school or a public school, but I don't know what homeschool is considered.
Ms. Varnum, do you know the answer to this? Is a private school, is a homeschool a private school, or am I way off base?
So that is what we consider it. They're certainly non-public, and under federal standards such as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, all private school students are to be considered all homeschool students are considered private schoolers. So they have those same rights. And so we apply this, it's really that Safe Schools affidavit. We apply this to every enrollee. And so I think it fits, but I guess it's just the will of the board on the language. I don't think there's any confusion, but I don't know if there's any confusion among parents. I know there's no confusion on the school side, so I'll just leave it there.
I would rather add in that specific word. So we've talked a lot about homeschoolers, and there are certain things they're allowed and not allowed to do. And we're having a whole policy directed to some of the things they can't do. So I would feel more comfortable if we just called it out, even if you put in parentheses, private schools includes homeschools. I don't know. I'm just feeling like it needs to be called out.
It's fine with me. Hopefully we get to use this policy a lot next year.
Yes.
Get some students back.
Absolutely.
Ms. Farnham, did you say you had something else on this policy?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out and down below the paragraph under number 3, the last sentence where it says drug testing and weapon searches also may be reasonable conditions as long as they meet any constitutional requirements. I just wanted to bring that up, that we have not participated in any type of drug testing. Just want to mention that was something that's different for us.
If you look at McKenna's notes, she did tell us that this was an optional paragraph. So it probably does, it's not required, it's optional. So I wanted to, that was one of my questions too, Julie.
So if I can just address the first two, if you look at the numbered paragraphs 1 and 2, that is what is related to the affidavit about suspension and expulsion that McKenna just read, that doesn't apply to enrollment of a student who's never been enrolled in a private or other public school. And that makes sense, because how is someone expelled or suspended from homeschool? But the next subsection of the statute, this is that the school board may deny admission to a student who's been convicted of a felony, and that would apply to homeschoolers. So, I mean, I would be fine, unless McKenna tells me I'm off base, I would be fine to say in that very first paragraph, who have been enrolled in or who have attended a non-public school or a public school in the state or any other state. And that would cover homeschool students. I think that you really can't require certification that they haven't been suspended, because it's impossible to be suspended from homeschool. But I think the school folks can figure that out when they're enrolling the kids.
We have not experienced any difficulty enrolling students because we couldn't figure out which applied to homeschools or not. But we generally operate the Safe Schools document or affidavit together. And if they're coming in from a homeschool, we would basically look back at the records and see how long they've been homeschooled, and then check just what McKenna said, check the disciplinary records from prior. And so it does say, you know, is your student under a suspension over the past, you know, year or whatever. And then we work through those. So the language discussion, I mean, it doesn't matter to me how we add the homeschool piece though. But I
don't doubt for a minute that you are not smart enough to figure all that out. But Dr. Faust had mentioned one time that I can't enforce something that is not written down. So if we aren't clear about what we mean, then it might be harder to, you know, argue with a parent. That's all.
So do you want it to say attended a non-public or public school?
I would say non-public, because if that meets all the criteria of all the other things, then that is an easy fix.
I think it still needs to say private school though.
Okay.
Because that's kind of its own category.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else on 4115?
So do you want it to say a non-public, private, or public school?
Yes, Stephanie does.
And I think that works. But applying it certainly works.
So before we move on, I think we need to decide in the paragraph that Julie brought up, are we going to leave it in or leave it out? I mean,
Yes, the drug test thing.
Yeah.
Do we do weapon searches? Have we required that before?
At sporting events we do, and it's right at we've done it at New Hanover High School to get into school. You know, after, I don't remember when it was, but it was like after a rash of, you know, stuff going on.
My reading of this policy is that sentence only applies to it would be a behavior contract or a requirement for enrollment of a student who's transferring in. It's not a general drug testing or searching policy. And so this is if you have a student who has, you know, been arrested, has a felony conviction for drugs, and they want to come to enroll in the school, and you may say, we can either deny it or we can allow it, but you have to agree to submit to drug testing. So that's how this is applied.
I don't have any problem leaving it in. I know lawyers probably don't like to hear this, but I think in terms of K-12 education, you're on relatively solid footing when it comes to your ability to search, relatively speaking. And, you know, I think, who
Reasonable
knows?
suspicion.
Yes. But I think relatively speaking, who knows if we'd ever use that, but I might as well have it in there.
And so if we might as well have it in there, then back to Julie's point, do we need to develop some sort of protocol, you know, to not us, but the school system? That's just, I mean, we don't have to discuss that, but is that what normally happens?
Already in place. So for instance, if a kid is coming from, or we are aware that they have felony charges. And so depending on what the felony charges are, let's say it is drug trafficking or drug use, whatever that is, there is a contract put in place before they can enter in. So all of those things are covered. This just gives us the ability to say that, hey, you will be tested. And that's what, because we have the ability to do so to make sure that they're not bringing those things to school or under the influence.
Okay, no, I'm good with leaving it in.
Yep, me too.
All right, any other questions? 4115 on for second reading. The next policy up for discussion will be 4120, domicile or residence requirements. Pete, I know you had something here.
Well, and it's not really anything about the policy itself, just a question. And I think it's great, as I was saying before, you know, subsection C 2, and I think it should stay in. I don't think we should change it. But I mean, I guess my question is, I wonder why there's no reciprocity. You know, why there's no, you know, if a teacher, it'd be great if a teacher could send their child to, you know, Cape Fear Community College tuition free. So anyway, that's just my point. Nothing really there to change or change our policy. I just think it'd be great if there was reciprocity and teachers got to send their children to college, as you know, they could send their children to our schools. So anyway, not just a point. Go teachers.
Okay, so I had some points of clarification for me to understand in the very first sentence where it says under the age of 21. So I guess I have been under the false impression that the age 21 or 22 was only for special education students. But am I to understand that we can have a 21-year-old in our high school?
If sometimes their birthday, they'll start the year and they turn 21. Let me rephrase
that. We can have a 20-year-old, because a 19-year-old could be the 18-year-old that turns 19 because they got held back. But I'm just looking at like a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old, you know, in the same school. I didn't realize that was for all student population. I thought it was just for special needs, special education service students.
21.
No, that's, yeah.
21 school year in which you turn 22 is generally only those with special needs or specifically with an IEP.
Right.
And then certainly the school year in which you turn 21, we continue to serve. So under 21 when coming in for enrollment.
Right. And that's, again, under state law, 115C 366, the student under the age of 21 who's not otherwise excluded is entitled to public education. So if they haven't graduated, there's no other reason. Maybe they dropped out of school for a year or two and they want to come back and they're entitled to that public education.
This also helps with, also applies to, ELL learners. Those who are asylees, who have been in school, out of school. I mean, like they were just saying, there's so many different measures, but as long as they don't start the year at 21, if their birthday.
Okay, now I was just looking at the huge age difference between a 14-year-old high school student and a 21-year-old high school student. I'm not debating it if it's the law. I mean, we do it, we do it. Okay.
But also just remember, you have 11-year-olds and 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds.
Yeah, you're right. It just seems weirder because
Right.
the older we are, the more our brains, and our actions go awry.
Right.
Okay, so in section B, number 3, it looks to me that was also not required, but optional. So I definitely wanted to just voice my opinion that to leave it in as that. But I was hoping that in A and B that comes underneath that we can reference policy 4005 where we specifically talk about the divorced parents statute. And then also too in letter C, do we need to reference the policies that we put in there too? I'm just real big on cross-referencing policies so that, it's real easy for, parents to see what they have to comply with.
That policy is cross-referenced at the cross references at the end, rights of separated or divorced parents.
No, and I see that, but I guess what my real question is, if we cross-reference it at the end, should we not put it in the body of the text somewhere? I mean, why would we cross-reference it in the bottom if we don't even reference what it applies to in the body of the policy?
I would say that I kind of like putting them at the end because I feel like it makes the policy look a little messy when you might just be looking for, the information. I mean, that's just
my preference is to reference it. I mean, to state it in the policy and then reference it at the back. But if that's not what we want to do, then that's fine with me. Same as when we're talking about the military parents, rights, then we should, reference policy 4050. It's referenced in the back, which we do, but it's just, to me, it's nice to know where it is. And so then, you can go reference it, but that's just a point that I had. So also and if we don't want to do it, then it doesn't matter.
Pete, what do you think? I don't know. I just think it makes it more difficult to read. But Pete, it's up to Pete.
I'm sorry, I keep moving myself. No, I agree with you. I think that, the more, because, then it becomes such a long document that it almost is, it's there, it's accessible. It's not like you have to go searching. It's right at the end of the policy. I think we leave it as it is.
Okay. So in this policy, I didn't see anywhere, and maybe I skimmed or I read too fast, that we don't require any proof of domicile, and we don't have anything in there on how you can make a report of a false domicile. Because I know it probably isn't, well, I don't even know if it is as prevalent now as it was when my kids were in school. But this was a huge problem, years ago, that people were lying, using false addresses all over the place. And there was no avenue really for reporting other than to report to the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services.
And yes, ma'am, I would say that's still a very active process.
So I think that if that is still a very active process, which I thought it was, I ran into a real estate agent who was using the address of one of her properties in order to get school mail. And so she could be in that. And I wanted to just go throttle her, but, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to, I said, do you really live there? That's a great house, But anyway, so can we include words around that somewhere in this policy?
I would guess my first question is, why weren't they included? Is there a reason that we aren't asking for people to verify where they live?
Because it used to be it was written out that you had to show like your rent, you had to show, a utility bill, or you had to really say, this kid is living with his dad and that's the domicile, or I live here and here's proof that I actually have my body going to put my head in the pillow at this house.
We We do require proof of residence, and proof of residence can be a lease document. If they are like doubling up and might be living along with someone else and they're not leasing and they don't own that property, so we can use a property tax if they do. If they don't, we can have utilities. And then other times where we don't have those, we can have both folks, the person who resides and can prove their residence, they sign an affidavit with the person that's living with them. So we do require all of those for our enrollments. I did not cross-reference this one with our current policy. Reviewed this one for any concerns. So let me peek to see.
Because I think we definitely have to state in our policy that what is accepted, even if it's including but not limited to.
You could also put it in regulations. Like, just because it's not in policy doesn't mean it's not written down and enforceable somewhere.
Then, yeah, because you did mention that in a couple places in your explanation, the policy versus regulation, but I don't think we need to call out necessarily in the policy if we've got a regulation, but I think we need to call out in the policy that we have a regulation. So people know clearly that you're going to have to show some proof.
Okay.
And that you have the right to report somebody who is violating that policy.
So I'm looking at B1 where we determine the domicile, and we do have procedures or and it really falls under our student assignment plan where we carry out these pieces. So I think that this is kind of the broad parameters of the policy, and it doesn't look like it would interfere with us. But so from an application standpoint, I'm fine with it. If you want it to be more clear, otherwise that's fine too.
I would like it to be more clear, and if that is the case, under cross-references, we don't cross-reference that policy on student assignment.
It's not a policy.
It's not a policy.
Plan is carrying out the policy.
I didn't hear you. That was all muffled.
It's not policy. The student assignment plan is not a policy. It's the procedures and the regulations to carry out the policy.
Okay. So how can we put some words in?
And the student assignment plan is pretty in depth. So if we, I don't know that we would be able to include all of that information, but I can certainly pull that up if that's helpful. I'm not sure.
I don't think you need to list all that.
Maybe you can cross-reference the student assignment plan at the bottom in the cross-references to this policy.
That's all I want is that piece, because I think people just have to sort of know right up front that, because when you say you presuming that to be the domicile, presuming and being actually fact are two different things.
Well, so my only concern with adding a regulation into the cross references is that we don't add, there aren't other, you're going to have a whole lot of other regulations that will apply in your school system, and those aren't referenced. Could you add it in could we add a sentence to B1 that references that plan, just that mentions the plan?
Well, and all I want is for us to consider making some words, and you guys state whatever you think is appropriate to meet my concern if Nelson and Pete agree with my concern. I don't want to sit here and be, hard-headed, but
we can add a sentence somewhere that says, in accordance with our student assignment plan, or something to that effect. I'm less worried about how it reads to the public, because I don't think this is how the public gets our information. I feel like the policies are more for how we administer the school system.
But,
So-
but as soon as somebody gets caught, they're going to come back and say, where in policy, does it state this? And I don't know, do our regulations hold up as policy if we are challenged on that?
I'm sure our student assignment plan holds up, absolutely. In fact, it's probably been to court a couple times.
Is it called the student assignment plan? Is that the name?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to just say the domicile of a student under 18 years of age is presumed to be the domicile of his or her parents, legal guardian, or legal custodian as defined by the general statutes of North Carolina. Domicile will be determined in accordance with the student assignment plan?
The New Hanover County School Student Assignment Plan.
I think
Yes.
it works.
That
Yes,
sounds good to me.
that would be good. Thank you.
Yep.
And then along those same lines, do we want to put in there that that there is you can report a or do we just not want to do that at all? Because
We have had folks report to us, like sometimes they'll just call and tell us. Sometimes that we've had Ethics 360 complaints. And then sometimes we'll just get an email that says this is not where this person lives. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to put a statement in there that any concerns or any complaints are investigated, because we regularly investigate domicile concerns.
yeah, I'm
So
sure.
I don't know, McKenna, if there's a place that we want to do that, or
Wherever it fits, maybe meeting domicile requirements, it could be like number 4 or.
Is it addressed in your student assignment plan?
let me look real quick. I will have to get back to you. I'm having trouble getting my iPad to work on this. It wants to change the language. I need to do it on my computer.
Well, even if it is referenced in there, can we not just make a sentence that says, all reports of false, if you have a report of false domicile, it can be reported to the office of the superintendent or designee, or to the office of the assistant superintendent for support services? I mean, just make a statement.
False domicile may be reported to the superintendent or designee?
Well,
Or-
this one should probably be specific to Julie, because her office is the one that takes it. But if we want to be consistent with the superintendent, then we can do that.
Well, and I'm doing such as the superintendent's designee.
Right.
Otherwise, I don't have the authority. But yes,
Right.
I agree. Yes, all of the, what was I looking for? The determination of domicile is explicitly written out in the student assignment plan. Changes to domicile after assigned to a school, criteria to remain at the school. What was the one particular thing I was looking for?
How to report.
Grievance.
Well, it's not really a grievance. Well, it's a grievance from a person that, not about his or her own domicile, but somebody else's domicile. Does that fall in the same category?
So we do have a section in here that requires updating of addresses. And if their domicile changes during any school year, it must be updated. Parent legal guardian must notify the school system. Failure to do so may result in inability to process a student's application. It kind of
But it
goes
still doesn't
toward-
say anything about reporting.
Yes, same thing. Right, right. Lottery, we pull. We do have any reassignment or transfer request that's approved. Oh, it says false or misleading information. Revocation. There's really nothing in here about that. So I would say that it would definitely fit in the student assignment plan. And right now, our student assignment plan for 2020. 2021, it references that it supports policy 8120. Of course, we'll change that to support policy 4120. It'll support a couple of other policies as well. But I think it could certainly be added into the student assignment plan that any reported domicile concerns or any reported reports of false or misleading domicile information will be investigated. Would that work?
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me where we have it. I just want to make sure that we have it clearly stated that a community member, has the ability and the right to report a false domicile. And if that, and when that happens, you guys investigate, and then do you have to bring it to the board? Suppose you tell the person they can't live there anymore because they don't have all the right documents. Does it come back to the board for us to make the final determination? Like the superintendent recommends, and then we have to have a hearing about it?
No. So number one, to clarify, they can live where they want to live. That's their choice, right? But if they don't meet school assignment criteria, then I will, I handle those, and they don't come back to the board unless, there's a request and the board deems necessary to hear an appeal.
So is it best in the student assignment plan, or is it best for a line in the policy, like meeting domicile requirements or something along those lines?
I think that it's probably really in the nuts and bolts, and I think it's better in the student assignment plan. But also, that's just from the application side of it. So from the community side of it, I think it could very well be a different answer. So I'll be fine applying it from either direction.
So can we put it in both places like we just did with the proof required?
So I haven't added anything about proof required. Did you want that specifically added, or was domicile will be determined in accordance with the New Hanover County Student Assignment Plan sufficient?
So that's what I meant, because that's where proof required is going to come.
Okay. You can then put another sentence right after that says false domicile may be reported to the superintendent or designee, or specifically to whatever that is.
Yeah, I'd be fine if it says concerns regarding
false domiciles.
Right. Be reported to I want to be consistent with where it's written in here. I don't know that it even says superintendent. Yeah, it can be written however you choose. It can be reported to the assistant superintendent of student support. I'm fine with that.
Let's just add it under B1 then, like just add one more sentence.
Yep, at the end of that, I think it makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Superintendent of Student Support is the correct title.
Assistant Superintendent of Student Support, yes.
I think that's good. Okay, anything else on domicile requirements?
Well, this is just a point for just a quick explanation. On letter C, number 5, why do we have to reference 2006, 2007 school year? And then for 2007, 2008 school year when we are so far away from that? I mean, talk about making the policy longer, that why is that important? I mean, just.
Let's see, is there anybody who was in kindergarten in 2006 that is still in the school system?
No.
No, they're like 30 years old or more.
Well, God, not 30.
They're old.
38. No,
Yeah.
but they just left the school system. They would have left in like 2018. No, 2017.
Even
no,
if they're special ed?
If they're special education, they can go to school till they're 22.
That's a good point. Thank you. Let's leave it.
Okay, I was just curious. I mean, that's what I was thinking it was, but I forgot about the age 21. Okay.
It's the age out year. I just haven't gone back to see if it's the accurate age out year, but I think it is.
All right. Anything else?
Does it matter that the ROTC in letter D, we use the word resides versus domiciled?
Letter D.
It's the ROTC participation.
I will have to check, but I am assuming that that was an intentional use of that word because that's what the rule is.
Okay.
But I can check that.
But if that's what the rule is, then we do it. I was just because we're making, we definitely make the distinction between domicile and residence, in other places. I was just curious as to why we picked that. But if that's the law, then that's what we do.
In that particular situation, do we enroll the student or is it just participation in?
Right. That's another good point.
It would be a visiting student. They would participate. And we actually operate under domicile because as it says residence, domicile is where we would determine school attendance, and there's only one domicile. They can have multiple residences.
So should that word then be domicile for our purposes? Because that's what we do.
Well, again, I think that the JROTC participation is very specific requirement of federal law. So I think McKenna was saying that she took the word or thinks that the word reside came from that requirement. And in that case, if it's a federal requirement to allow it for residents, then you really don't have the discretion to change it and make it stricter.
So then,
the paragraph does include domicile. It says without regard to domicile. So, yeah.
Oh, I didn't. Okay, you're right. Sorry. Okay, I'm good.
Okay, so policy 4120 on for a second reading. Policy 4125, I assumed most of this, not all of it, was strictly covered by federal and state law. So I didn't really have anything to add to it or subtract from it, but I will begin with Ms. Varnum and go from there.
The only piece on this is on page 2 under assignment. And it would be that second paragraph, the superintendent shall designate the director of student assignment. We don't have a director of student assignment, but we could, if we want to have it under a director, it could be director of student support, or it could be the assistant superintendent of student support.
Okay.
Which is better?
Which would you recommend?
To be consistent with other policies, I would just put designate the assistant superintendent of student support.
Okay.
Because we don't really have designate for directors in many of these.
Okay.
My only questions were with regard to, they're on page 6, 7, and 8 about the number 2, number 3 under A, and number 2 under B, and 5 under B, where it says optional. Are those, McKenna put those in and said that they were optional, and I'm just curious as to whether this is something that our school system is able to support. I don't have a problem with any of the optional things, but again, I don't do the work.
I'm sorry, where are you?
I'm on page, if you start on page 6,
Mm-hmm.
number 2 and number 3 under A are optional.
Okay.
And letter B, number 2 is optional. So, and then number 5 is under B is also optional. So no, that's under C, sorry. So I just wanted to make sure that our school system was okay with those optional pieces, because I'm okay with them, but if they're optional, we're making an intentional decision to add them.
Yeah, and I think many of these are to support intention to appeal, and whether the person who's appealing has the opportunity to complete documents, and they can just provide that in writing. It's very similar to how we support procedural safeguards for individuals with disabilities. That if you communicate something to us, we understand that is your intent, and we will either put it in writing with you or explain to you how to do that. So I think it's really just carrying out the procedural safeguards with a little additional care.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr.
Very
Wilson?
good, very good.
I had a couple of comments, and maybe that's that Julie just covered that, where it has something about, I think it's in D1B2 about the 2-day limit. And I'm just wondering if that's something that is necessary or whether that's too restrictive. Says they have the right within 2 days. D1B2.
Yeah, this policy definitely had some real specific guidelines on 2 days, then another 2 days, and another 2 days.
So it was D1B2. Notice that within 2 school days of the school's decision, the complainant has the right to notify the homeless liaison. And I wonder if that is I don't think, and McKenna's notes indicate that wasn't necessarily a deadline. I wondered if that was, you would want to restrict it to 2 days, or whether someone could still make that intention known longer than 2 days. And then my other point was for DC3, appeal to the board of the superintendent's decision. It says the board or a panel of at least 2 board members will hear the appeal. And I'm not sure, I don't believe that there's a requirement to have an in-person hearing. And so was wondering whether that would give more rights than is required, and whether you would want to have a consideration on the record. McKenna, am I misinterpreting that, or Julie?
So the 2-day thing, the reason there's really strict timeframes here is that there's a 15 deadline to complete the entire resolution process. And so if people wait too long to initiate the complaint, then you're going to have a hard time getting everything done.
And I agree. And this is also the timeline of the liaison that we have working with this. So this is our homeless liaison's timeline. And so she has to, it's a school social worker here within our district office, and she has to respond in this manner of time, and then within 2 days, and then immediately, no longer after 1 day, and then notice within 2 days. And a lot of this also is because, and I don't want to try to get into the federal regulation aspect, but this is a federal regulation, not necessarily just state. And so I think some of this, while it might be optional, I think it's certainly with the best intent I'm okay if we loosen it a little, but yes, we do have a 15-day timeline. It's kind of, because you're dealing with families that are in a really precarious situation. They're identified as homeless. There are certainly some potentially critical and traumatic things going on. We work really quickly, and it kind of reminds me of that quick decision timeline that goes along with IDEA when filing a grievance. I mean, several things have to, like, the world has to turn many, many ways within 10 and 15 days.
So my question, Julie, is just if a parent comes in 3 days later and submits that, are they out of luck then? That was my concern.
No, and this is actually, the way I'm reading this is the work of the liaison. The parent isn't on a timeline. It's that the homeless liaison shall provide a complainant with the copy, and that written statement must include all the following. And then number 2, the liaison's notice within 2 days of the decision. The liaison has to notice the parent within 2 days of the decision that the parent has the right to notify them in an appeal. So I see this as a quick timeline of the liaison.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way. It read to me, and maybe it's just because I don't, I'm not doing that actual work, that notice that within 2 days of the school's decision, the complainant has the right to notify. It read to me like a limitation on the complainant's ability to notify the homeless liaison. And that's what concerned me. So if I'm misreading that, I apologize.
Well, then I would say that that's worth revising that language, because we don't want a 2-day limitation on the parent. We want to operate in a swift manner on our end.
So what language do you suggest that we switch that to then?
I think it's within 2 school days, the notice must be provided to the complainant that they have the right to notify the liaison of their intention of appeal.
But if you go back, and I hate to belabor this, if you go back up to the main introductory paragraph of subsection B, immediately but not later than 1 school day after learning of the complainant's disagreement, the homeless liaison shall provide a copy of the statement. That includes, and the statement must include all of these things, the contact information, notice that the complainant has the right to notify the homeless liaison of the complainant. So I'm just wondering why the 2 days is there if that's the notice that's given to the parent.
Yeah, then I think that your point's well made. Let's strike the within 2 days, because we still have that 15-day timeline, and we'll still operate under that. But we don't want to limit the time of the parent. It's just that we still have to operate within the 15. McKenna, what do you think? It makes my head hurt.
I know, this is like this makes my questions look like nothing.
It just, the notice itself has to go out to the parent within 1 school day. And so I just wasn't sure where the 2 days came from, and it seemed restrictive to me.
I agree.
To do anything.
Yeah, so is everybody okay with taking out the within 2 school days? We're still going to notice within 1 day, but we're not going to ask for that return in 2 days. We might work with them and work outside. It might become 3.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay, so in D1B2, we're getting rid of the within 2 school days.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we will put 4125 ahead for first reading.
My second point was about the hearing. Does that require an in-person hearing, McKenna? I don't think it does, but
I don't know.
I don't know either.
When I read this policy, I don't know, a month or 2 ago, I made myself a note that said, I underlined the 15-day school deadline in the state board policy, and it said does not require an in-person hearing. So apparently 2 months ago, that was my opinion, that the state board policy did not require an in-person opinion.
Should we get rid of that then? Would that be a recommendation to staff?
Well, I think you could say the board will consider the appeal. rather than hear the appeal. And that way there's
Much
no
better.
requirement for an in-person hearing.
The less work I have to do, I'm all for it.
And that's under the
Wait.
5 optional 1 on page 7. Just making sure I'm reading it in the right place.
DC3.
D, yes, D, oh, so many pages on that one.
There it is.
C. I'm sorry. Yeah. D.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
well, wait, are they gonna have a right to a hearing because they're alleging a violation of the law?
My understanding was that this is a separate appeal process under this particular policy. I'll pull up the state board policy and see.
I think I'm hearing a bell that says we're getting the gong. We're at the Academy Awards and we're getting belled off, we're getting played off.
I think you're right. The credits are definitely rolling.
Yeah.
Do we want to, I mean, there are others here that we didn't into. Do we want to hold this one over and do a little research before we move on?
That's fine.
For homeless students, you mean?
Yes.
Ms.
Only on the appeal section, or move on with may hear the appeal, or however you want to do that. I don't want to articulate that language.
Is that where she said consider for appeal?
I think that they have a right under this procedure. There's a right to the board to decide it, but it's just a matter of whether there's a right to an in-person hearing. And I'm just pulled up this state board policy again and trying to, I don't see anything. It just says, I must allow for appeals to be made orally or in writing. But, it might be worth taking a minute to make sure that's right. What we could do is that McKenna and I and Julie could work to make sure that we get that language right. It could still go forward, but if we have to tweak it,
that's fine.
Between now and when it goes on for first reading to the board.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm going to consult with our superintendent, our board chair, Ms. Osborne. I was going to give you a call and see if we want to maybe schedule an additional meeting at some point in the near future to try to clear these up, because I'm pretty sure we are behind our 18-month schedule, and probably by a considerable margin. So, this is important. I know it's a lot of work. I'm sure everybody could use a main line of adrenaline or caffeine. I know we're tired, but I do want to make sure we get as many of these done as possible. So I'll be putting that out in the future. As for this meeting, let me see here. I would like to entertain a motion at this time to put forward for first reading. Actually, I'll waive first reading for that. Ms. Stagner, do I have to clarify that I'm going to waive first reading for the board agenda and for
I think that you would say that you're going to request that the board waive first reading. The board ultimately will make that decision, when they're presented, but you can say that we'll move these forward and request for waiver of first reading.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion to move these forward and request a waiver of first reading from the board for policies 2330 board meeting agenda, and for policy 3445, student scholarships.
I thought that one was being held.
Yeah, we're holding 40. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we're holding 40.
Oh, I thought we made some small adjustments. I thought we decided that we had to make a few small adjustments, like the artifact.
And yes, and the carryover of the money.
We changed the GPA. We changed the GPA requirement, got rid of the class standing or class rankings. So
I understood that you were going to use this, take 3445 and use this for the remainder of the year until.
that was my intent.
Okay.
Okay. So we're moving it forward, and then we can always change it later.
Yes.
Okay, but we are going to put in the artifact part.
And the changes to GPA and class rankings.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay.
And I'll be, I've taken, Dr. Faust gave me the information on the foundation, and I'll be working with them in the future beyond this school year.
Thank you. So again, the motion would be to move policy 2330 board meeting agenda and policy 3445 student scholarships forward to the board and request a waiver of first reading.
For both of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just wondering, so policy 2330 is already in existence, and so that's not adoption of a new, that's just a revision.
Do we have to waive reading to revise a policy?
The board, it doesn't have a requirement in policy 2410. There's no requirement for a first reading on a revision.
Oh, okay. We've done it that way before we started this policy revision or the policy update. So that's fine. I'll just bring those forward and request that they be adopted.
And so 3445 is also, I mean, that would be a renumbering of the, in revision of the existing policy. So I'm not sure how that fits in. It's really not it's not a new policy. It's just a revision of an existing policy and renumbering. So I don't know that needs first reading either. So
I would just put this on for new business.
I would address these both as revisions rather than new policies.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Motion to move board meeting agenda 2330 and student scholarships 3445 forward to the board.
You need a motion for that?
Yep.
Yes, motion.
Second? All right, Pete, I'm going to assume you meant second because you're still on mute.
Yes, I am. Sorry,
Okay.
second.
There's a motion and a second. Ms. Craybill, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote aye. It is agreed to. Next, I will entertain a motion to move policies 4040, 4110, 4115, 41 and 4120 forward to the board for first reading.
So moved.
Thank you. Also have 4300.
4300, I thought.
Thank you. And 4300.
And so moved.
Okay.
And so seconded.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ms. Craybill, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion is agreed to. I will entertain at this time a motion to adjourn.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So now that we've just approved 4,300, all the other ones that we wanted to approve, that we were holding on to for 4,300, can we not move those forward now?
They're already on there. I mean, we don't have to push them forward again. They're already on there for second reading, so they'll be adopted at the next monthly meeting.
So what you could do is waive first, and you don't have to do the motion now, but you could request that 4,300 be waived for first reading so that then it could be adopted along with all the other 4,300 policies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
I'll make that motion because we already talked about a bunch of these things.
so
Okay.
you don't need to have a motion now, but when it's presented at the board meeting, you can request waiver of first reading for 4,300 so that it can be adopted along with all the other ones on that are already up there.
So who requests that? Nelson as the chair or Peter?
I would say that Nelson should do that when he presents the policies.
I have a quick question for consideration. Can we consider as a policy or as a policy committee to adopt all of the North Carolina State Board policies and then go back and pull the ones later to do the updates? That's so that we get back in sync.
I think
That would just be something to consider.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we should consider for the next policy committee meeting, because that's where I want to go. I think that's a good idea. We wouldn't do that now, would we?
No, I'm saying you need to consider, we have.
Yeah.
That way, what I think what we're trying to get to is where we're looking at 7 policies and then tweaking them to us. But right now we're going through like 30 of them, and some are not, we're not even having to fix or do anything. So my question, or what I want you to just think about, is if we adopted them as the North Carolina School Board already has those policies, if we adopted them, and then as we were in our policies, we went back and we pulled those that we had questions over, and then did some whatever we needed to do with them. That would just be.
I agree.
My only concern with that is when we are merging some of the language from our existing policy into as soon as we adopt all the school board association policies, we're rescinding everything we had. So I just have a little bit of a problem with that approach.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can talk about it. I guess I would say that these ones have been vetted by their legal department. And
I mean, just as your board attorney, I would say that you want to make sure that your policies match the goals and practices of the school system. It is, it's not always just a cut and paste. A lot of them are legal requirements that you have to follow. But there is, as a policy making body, that's really your main job, is to decide what policies to have for the district.
Could we possibly, I don't know if you could do this, McKenna, or you could work with Ms. Stagner, could we possibly identify those policies which are federally and state mandated, at least, as policies that we wouldn't have to change very much?
The problem is there are parts of with policy that are mandated, and then there are other things within the same policy that are not mandated. So that's
even with the domicile requirement, a lot of that comes directly from state law, but you all were discussing what you wanted to add to make it customized to fit your district. So,
Yeah,
we can talk about it offline. I don't want to take up anybody else's time. It's 12:15. We'll talk about it one-on-one. But at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
No, sir.
Hearing none. Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Aye.
I will vote aye, and I will offer my thanks to all the attendees, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, guys. See you
Thank
later.
you for your patience in explaining things to us new people. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you guys are good. See y'all later.